Before the reader was a view of a beautiful room, bright, decorated with flowers. The red-haired beautiful girl drew with paints, even though she hadn't done it before for a long time. The author's style was felt in the work, light brush touches, vividness of the image. The painting was finished. Belle thought it was an excellent example of a portrait in Viola's style. She thought she had great artistic ability, but then she realised that even a 4-year-old could draw better. It made her sad. The beauty realised that with such skills, she would not be able to pretend to be Viola, and therefore she had no idea what to do next. And though she was Viola, she wasn't the right Viola, and she couldn't draw at all. Meanwhile, at the art show, there was a lot of good work and someone giving a talk. The girl with the brown hair realised that the report was to blame, and she had signed up for these classes because of her usual interest. But here's the problem. This girl understood absolutely nothing about art, but her scholarship depended on her grade in the subject, because she couldn't just get a part-time job, so she needed an A grade. To achieve her goal, she went to an art gallery that exhibited surrealist works. Even as a child, when she took art classes, she dreamed that her work would be shown somewhere, but quickly realised that wasn't going to happen, so she dropped out. But looking at the paintings now, she realised that they didn't look that bad, but maybe that was because she wasn't good at drawing herself. What attracted her to this style was the fact that you can draw, for example, a pipe and say that it is not a pipe, as well as use some special technique, and the paintings are evaluated not only by the level of skill of the artist. The girl stared at one painting. She didn't understand what it depicted, but there was a description that could be read. It said that this painting had been in the gallery for a long time and could fulfill any wish. The girl thought it was either a joke or things were going badly in this institution. But since she'd already come here, she thought she could try making a wish once, and she sincerely wished for a life she hadn't lived so far. But nothing happened. At that moment, she thought the girl in the painting smiled. The stranger reached out her hand toward the image, for it seemed to her that she had imagined it, and that she was the one who had already begun to hallucinate. At that moment, a guard entered the hall, blew a whistle and informed her that the paintings could not be touched. This all startled the girl, but that wasn't what she needed to fear, as the painting itself began to suck her inward by the arm. It was an incomprehensible, powerful magic and force that pulled her in and she passed out. And then she opened her eyes. She was lying in a beautiful bed, in a completely unfamiliar place, with a changed appearance. The girl abruptly sat up in bed, started groping herself, and didn't realize what was happening to her. Besides, this room was full of paintings. Then she stood up and walked over to the mirror and saw her reflection. And at that moment, memories started to pop up in her head. But they did not belong to her, but to Viola Helen, the mistress of this house and this body. The main character sat down on the edge of the bed. She thought it might be a dream. And then a book caught her eye. She picked it up and read the title. At the end of the villain's journey, a red rose. The girl started reading. And then she realised that Viola was a minor character in this novel, who would do nasty things and die a shameful death. She tried to seduce the novel's protagonist's lover, was evil and jealous, and was killed by the protagonist at the end. Belle didn't like it. She closed the book, but then noticed that the title started to disappear. When she opened it again, the pages were clean. The girl began to realise that her wish had come true, and she was caught up in the novel she had just read. She cried, because where is it seen that a person got into the plot of the book, and not the main character, but a secondary one? Since everything happened like this, the girl decided to calm down first of all, and then try to find happiness here. Belle decided to enjoy life and not act like Viola from the book. So, in this world, art is very much valued, especially painting. So Robina and Viola competed with each other through paintings. But the problem was that Robina was always very gifted, so only Viola considered the main character her rival and stole ideas for drawings from her. Another problem was that the beauty that sat on the bed had no talent or skills. Then the idea occurred to her that maybe she could draw something, now that she was in the body of an artist. The girl hoped that she would succeed, but it didn't work out this time either. This made Viola insanely upset, and she lay down on the sofa and began to feel sorry for herself. The protagonist realised that since the real Viola was in an accident and barely survived, it was then that the girl got into this body, so it will be possible to write off the deterioration of her abilities. Belle ran up to the drawing, looked at it again, and realised that it was just a horror, and therefore there was no reason for her to compete with Robina, and therefore the plot of the book would develop differently. At that moment, a fair-haired, beautiful maid entered the room. Viola addressed the maid by name, calling her Jenna, something that startled the girl as she thought she had done something wrong. The maid came to help her mistress get ready for a meeting at Lady Rubina's, but the protagonist said she would handle it herself. The maid started to shake with fear, so the girl decided to calm the maid down, but made it worse. The girl started trying on outfits, and each of them was more frank than the other, but they perfectly emphasized her figure and created a wow effect. So it would be strange to deny that she was beginning to like it all. Viola decided to go to the meeting and show everyone her power of mediocrity. A maid came into the room and asked if her mistress was ready for her. The girl stood in a red dress in the room and laughed. And the maid was pouring sweat and thought that the mistress had become very strange. A horse-drawn carriage was taking Viola to a meeting with other artists. The world around her delighted the girl, for it was like a fairy tale. And so they arrived at Rubina's house. It was gorgeous. Looking at all those beautiful places that were described in the book, the girl began to realize more and more that she was in a different world. And now she was standing at the entrance to the room. The artist's house was wonderfully furnished. Everything was tastefully chosen. And so she walked into the room. There were other girls already there. One of them was painting a picture. The other was frozen at the window when Viola walked in. Her appearance did not please the artists, who looked among themselves. And this reaction was absolutely expected. The atmosphere was as unfriendly as possible. And it was understandable, but still it was quite unseemly to ignore a person like that. But the girl made a decision to bitch everything, since now she was the villain of the affair, and she also realized that she needed to walk with her head held high and show a different side of herself and sit away from Rubina. This caused the people around her to be surprised. A similar gesture from Viola was noticed by Rubina and said that she had taken a seat next to her for her, but she sat far away from her. The main villain confirmed this and said that's where she wanted to paint today. At this point, the blonde almost cried, and the other artists asked the girl what she was up to this time. Viola tried to smile, but it came out sinister and said that she liked the new angle for the drawing. That's why she chose that place. Everyone was closely watching her every move, and the protagonist thought that when she finished her masterpiece, everyone would marvel. And so she began to paint with the thought that now she would show everyone the power of a talentless artist. Some time passed and this masterpiece was finished. The girl thought she had done her best. But the result was the same as always, so she hoped she could quit drawing now. Viola hoped that if she stopped crossing paths with Rubina, she could avoid death, so she smiled. The girl scrutinized the other girls' work and realized that they all had artistic talent, unlike hers. But the result was the opposite. The artists were surprised and delighted with Viola's work. They said they had never seen this style before. No one thought she was capable of such creativity. Such an assessment caused Viola to be shocked. The club members, on the other hand, continued the discussion. In their opinion, it was still somewhat uncertain, but the rough strokes gave the work a special charm. Belle thought that something was obviously wrong here, so she decided to elaborate. She asked if her work looked strange and if she should quit painting, but the girls assured her that it was a true masterpiece, and now her authorial style in such an abstract work was visible again. The girl thought that the club members wanted to mock her, but looking into their eyes, she realized that it was sincere. But nevertheless, Viola decided to shift the focus of the girls' attention and pointed to Rubina's painting and said that she had painted very close to the original. But her words had little effect. In fact, the girls started hugging Viola and saying that her picture should be seen by other people, as hiding such talent is a crime. At that moment, Rubina came over to Viola, put her hand on her shoulder, and told her that she held the same opinion. The blonde smiled gently and said that they needed to display the red-haired girl's painting so that other people could appreciate it. It seemed to Viola that even such ordinary words of her rival gave off a blinding light. It occurred to the girl that maybe in this world, people see everything from a different angle. The moment of tea drinking came, but Viola went deep into her thoughts, so she lost the thread of the conversation, and it was noticed by the interlocutors, so the girl asked not to pay attention to her and continue the conversation. And then one of them suggested that Viola was more interested in talking about men than paintings. At this point, the red-haired beauty decided to show off and said that she was popular with men, so she had something to say about them as well. But the girls remarked that they thought the men liked Lady Rubina better and looked at her. But the protagonist commented on this. She said that her popularity was before, and now she is no longer interested in men. After that, she sipped her tea. The girl, however, realized that if she didn't want to die, she shouldn't chase after someone else's. The girls did not understand their acquaintance. Did she not want to be in the company of men anymore? And then Viola noticed the strange facial expressions of the club members, and Robina's including. She didn't understand what it could mean. The girls turned the tables on the blonde. They asked if what was being said about her lately was true. Specifically, there was a rumour that Robina was betrothed to Duke Evan. Viola realised that the main male character was finally being discussed. He was Evan de Fellower. He had beautiful facial features and a noble article. The man belongs to a noble family of dukes, very caring and kind towards the main character, and without such a character no romantic story is impossible. Viola hoped that Evan and Robina's pairing would work out well. And then she thought she could detect a note of envy slipping into her voice. The girls immediately whispered, and the red-haired beauty realised that she should have kept silent. Evening came, the tea party was over, and it was time to go home. Here Viola was stopped by Robina. She wanted to talk to her about something without witnesses. The girl didn't understand what the blonde wanted to talk to her about. Robina looked at her companion strangely, embarrassed. She couldn't understand why her rival was almost crying. And the point was that the blonde didn't want an engagement to the Duke. Viola, on the other hand, didn't understand what was going on. How come her rival didn't want to be betrothed to the Duke? Robina was sure that in this marriage she would be lonely, and the Duke would not love her. As any touch, even now, he was unpleasant to him from her side. Besides, there were different rumours. And then it occurred to Viola that the girl did not want to marry the Duke because he was a castrato. Duke Evan was known to be a reserved man and did not know how to behave properly with the opposite sex. This may have been the reason for the rumours about him being a eunuch, or the fact that he likes men. Robina, meanwhile, said she didn't want to get married without love, so she didn't want to get engaged to Evan. And after that, she decided to resort to a primitive manipulation. Say, if we are friends, then could not the girl fulfill her request, and at the same time looked with such pure and honest eyes? And it was a forbidden technique because it was hard to say no when they look at you like that. But the next thing Viola didn't expect at all, Robina took her hands and asked her if she could seduce the Duke. This didn't please the red-haired beauty at all, so she said she couldn't do it. The main character didn't want to do it because if she helps her friend break her engagement, it will be just like in the book, and that's bad. After all, if the girl was refusing to marry because of rumours, then everything should have fallen into place soon. But then Robina snickered and said that she had no one else to ask for such a thing, and Viola herself felt uncomfortable about it. And then it occurred to the main character that if she honours this request, things might not end as badly as in the book. In general, they will not love each other, and the Duke with such external data could be a nude model. And if you think about it that way, making sure the engagement doesn't happen isn't that hard, all because the girl knew Evan's secret. Since there was only so much that needed to be done, Viola decided to agree, Robina glowing with joy at that. It should be noted that information about Duke Evan in high society appears very rarely. It is known that he does not like touching, does not talk to women, is tall, and has a cold, piercing gaze. And based on that alone, he could be described as a rather handsome young man. At this point, the girl thought that he might start emitting light too, since he is the main character. Then she would need sunglasses. Sitting at her desk as she wrote the letter, she thought that if her plan didn't fail, this man would be her perfect partner. Plus, judging by the public's reaction to her art today, in this world, she'll be able to draw and show her work to people. A few days later, she had a chance to realise what she had planned. On this day, one gallery in the city had their drawing circles paintings on display, and many people came to the show. But at the same time, it became her personal embarrassment day. But she looked gorgeous in her lace dress and attracted stares. The men who came to the exhibition kept staring at her, but it annoyed her, and she decided to stare back at them. At that moment, Robina in a sky blue dress approached her, saying that the Duke was also attending the event. But the blonde had questions about Viola's outfit, and the blonde didn't understand what was wrong with her dress. And then it came to her that today wasn't as blatant as usual. But Viola was fine with it, for in her past world such open attire spoke of women's availability, or perhaps ancient professions. At that moment, the girl looked around, but she didn't see Evan in the crowd of other people, which was expected, since the book said he liked secluded, quiet places. And this place was the balcony. That's where the man was standing. So she didn't hesitate to follow there, and seeing the guy, asked him if he had looked at the paintings or not. The Duke heard her perfectly well, and even glanced at her, but he did not answer the question and turned away. But Vila did not leave, and said that the breeze here was just right. Obviously the man didn't want to talk to her, but she knew his secret. Even though Robina was sure he wouldn't love her, that was absolutely not the case. As for whether or not he was castrated or not, the book didn't have accurate information, so she squinted a little where she shouldn't. Suddenly Evan turned to face her, and she stared at him even more openly, and then he uttered a single word, "Where?" which brought the girl out of her staring state and made her flinch. And then he added and asked where she was looking so intently now. The girl clutched her head and started making excuses, saying she hadn't noticed that she was looking where she shouldn't. The boy's aura radiated anger and discontent. Robina was watching. The blonde peered out from behind the curtain. Evan thought she was crazy, and she had no choice but to go to extreme measures. Viola slowly began to approach the Duke, who had nowhere to run. She walked primly up to him, wrapped her long red hair around him, and asked if she could make him one suggestion. But he managed to get away from her. Then he asked what the offer was. The girl smiled and offered to help him. His expression was indescribable, and the tone with which he spoke her name was indescribable as well, for the man clearly didn't trust her. They stood next to each other on the balcony near the very railing, and the Duke said with confidence that he knew what kind of person she was. His reaction was now clear to the beauty, but she asked him not to stress so much over her presence and offer. Evan, on the other hand, turned his back on her, telling her that she wasn't someone worth stressing over. But Viola didn't give up, and asked if he wasn't curious about the help she was offering him. The answer was simple. He didn't need anyone's help. Then she came quite close to him and spoke in his ear that she knew his secret. Those words made him look directly at the girl and ask her what she meant. Now they looked at each other carefully. The man's reaction changed. He began to hesitate. The best part was that the Duke was now like a kitten that had sharpened its claws and was ready to fight back. Evan was insanely cute, so she didn't hold back and started moving closer and closer to him. It made him nervous. The Duke told her to stop and stay back. But who listened to him? That's right, no one. Viola provoked him. She said that if she took another step, the man would be right in front of her, and if she reached out her hand, she could feel his skin. Her actions made the Duke blush. At this point, Evan asked her to stop and looked very defenseless and horny. That was what she was seeking. So the girl asked the man about the fact that if she took one more step, his body would become very hot. The Duke didn't yet understand what was happening, and Viola smiled and repeated that she knew his secret. 181185. The fact is that in the Duke's family, the disease has been passed down from generation to generation. Touching women caused men's bodies to become very hot and confined them to bed. There was no cure for this disease. It disappeared on its own after the hero met his true love. Also, no one knew where the disease came from, as well as whether it is a curse or not. As Viola studied the novel, this moment seemed very romantic to her. This situation reminded her of other fairy tales she had read as a child, about a princess who is saved by a prince with his kiss of true love. Now on the balcony, the girl was playing that card. She once again asked the Duke if he needed help, because she knew how to get the desired result. It seemed to her that the man would accept her help, though now he was hesitant in his choice, for it was not an easy one. He had a sweetly belligerent look on his face at this point, and the girl asked him to stop looking at him like that. After all, she wasn't offering him help for free. But she doesn't need the money, but she would like to have him as a model for her paintings. In her fantasies, she painted a nude picture of him, but in reality, no matter how realistic it looked in her thoughts, in reality, the girl was not ready for it. Evan didn't trust her and asked if she was up to something, even though she was just trying to fulfill her role in the play. So he squinted his eyes and repeated that he had no idea what she was talking about. And Viola realized he was a tough nut to crack. In order to somehow add points to herself, the beauty declared that the Duke was absolutely not her type. Since she likes more assertive men, the man's kilos skewed with emotion at this point, and then the girl noticed it, but couldn't see what the problem was, since she hadn't said anything shocking. But now, the Duke had a question as to why she was trying to help a man who was not her type. Viola answered without hesitation that she was doing it for a quiet life. She said she always and everything repeated after Robina, but now she had made up her mind not to waste her precious life envying the good of others, so she would do things her own way. In addition, she realized that she is a valuable person, so she wants to help the lovers to be together, but not formally. but for real. To prove her words, the girl asked the man to look at her painting, as this masterpiece was no longer an imitation of Rubina's work, and they stared at her work. Viola, however, continued her entreaties, saying that it was an excellent proposal, since the Duke had already chosen Rubina for the engagement. It seemed to her that Evan realized that if he was around Rubina, the same love might develop between them. The man wanted to answer something, but Viola gestured for him to be quiet, turned around and said that she knew her friend was very sweet and beautiful, especially when she smiled. Perhaps that's why she was jealous of her, because it was as if a light was emanating from her rival. And then she turned to the Duke and said that it was all the same. He would soon love her too. The man, however, stood impressed by such a poignant speech. After that, he sighed heavily and agreed to this venture. Viola was glad that she had gotten her way, but asked the young man to follow all her advice without exception. But Evan wondered what she would do if nothing came of it. Well, in that case, she'd have to take responsibility for him, though that would be a big disadvantage, since she wouldn't get to draw him naked. The girl said the last one out loud, which puzzled the Duke, so she decided to brighten the awkwardness with laughter. The man tried to cover himself with his hands as he realized she wasn't kidding when she said she wanted him as her sitter. Viola, on the other hand, started saying that there were rumors about him being castrated, so she thought he would be the perfect model. But now she's given up on that, so he can sleep easy. And there was a mistake. The Duke heard the words about the castrato, but the beauty raised her hands in a conciliatory gesture. The girl admitted that there are rumors in the community that he is castrated. The guy started shaking and tried to answer her something. He asked her not to think anything unnecessary. He blushed, closed his eyes and clutched his white shirt, then shouted that he wasn't a castrato. Then he grabbed his head and wondered why he was making excuses for this girl. Viola smiled and said she would assume he was a perfectly healthy man, with all working organs. And anyway, would she call a man she wanted to seduce a castrato? He decided not to pursue the subject further, so when he agreed definitively, she took his hands by the edges of his shirt so as not to touch his body, and said she was glad to cooperate. After the deal with the Duke, Viola returned to the hall and noticed that it had gotten very noisy, and people were starting to crowd in. They were all looking at the girl's painting and discussing something. They said that her drawing was laconic and free. There was no connection between the strokes and the direction of light. The girl hid behind a column and listened to the critics. Connoisseurs of painting said that every stroke was thought out and everything superfluous was removed, although in fact Viola painted what she saw. People in this world seemed strange to her. After all, she had been told all her life that she didn't have an ounce of talent. As she remembered, she was so angry. Viola wanted to leave quietly, but one of the girls noticed her and stopped her. Just then, one of the men coughed and said he was surprised that it was Viola's painting. And the girl next to him added that she didn't immediately recognize her brushwork because her color sense was so much better. And then the beauty realized that it's not all that bad and promised everyone that she will continue to create paintings in this style. She also apologized to Rubina and said she would no longer imitate her drawing style. Viola admitted that she wanted to be like a bright person like her friend, so she copied her paintings and drawing style. But it's time to love and accept yourself. Viola took Rubina's hands, asked for forgiveness, and looked at her with a tender gaze, realizing that this was the perfect moment for the villain to leave the stage. Rubina didn't answer at first, but then she smiled and said she forgives the girl since they are friends. Viola had the feeling that she could even see the blonde's wings, and thought she was a real angel. But then Rubina faltered, for she wanted to talk to her friend, but she couldn't hear, as it wasn't the right place. So they went out into the garden, which was also beautiful, and in the middle was a magical fountain. Once alone, the first thing the blonde asked was how Viola had managed to seduce the Duke. After all, she had seen the red-haired girl interacting quite intimately with Evan, but the latter had assured her friend that everything was going the way it should. But suddenly the girl clenched her fist imperceptibly and asked Viola if she had anything else to say to her. But the red-haired girl did not see the gesture, nor did she hear Rubina's last words, and the blonde just covered her eyes and decided to pretend she hadn't said or done anything. Afterward, she pulled herself together and smiled dazzlingly, saying she trusted her friend. But the moment the girls decided to return to the exhibition, a man ran up to Viola, grabbed her arm and asked her how long she was going to avoid him. It was a handsome, oriental-looking man who didn't understand what was going on with the girl lately, and why she was acting like this. His name was Theo Debbie France, and he was very angry right now. He was a supporting character in the novel and a close friend of Robina's, but why he behaved this way the girl did not understand. But besides all of that, he was the one Viola had managed to seduce. But now she realized that this man was too rough. He squeezed her hand, wouldn't let go, and demanded that the girl give her reasons for ignoring him. But she asked him to let go of her hand first. She was in pain, but Theo ignored her pleas and said he wouldn't let go until she gave at least one reason. It was starting to make the girl angry, because she was really hurting, and this man was acting like a real thug and a bore. But she had no choice but to say that she thought it was over between them. But Theo was clearly of a different opinion, judging by the reaction to such a response. He stood his ground and said that even if she had nothing to say, he had something to tell her. The man glared at Robina and motioned for her to leave, leaving them alone. The blonde didn't disagree with her friend and turned away, pretending she wasn't here. And Viola didn't understand how she could do such a thing in such a situation. But she not only turned away, but even left the garden. And the red-haired girl looked after her and thought that she should have stayed and reprimanded Theo, since they were friends. So since this was the case, she had no choice but to use the last method. It was a purely feminine ploy. Viola stepped with all her might on the man's foot with her heel. Theo pretended to be in a lot of pain and played up the tragedy. But it was his own fault, since she was the one who had asked him to let her off on good terms. The girl looked at her pen. She said she didn't want to see this guy again, as he had terrible manners. She warned Theo that if he did anything like that to her again, she would not hold back. At that moment, Viola noticed that Robina was returning to the garden. The girl thought her friend had come running to her rescue, but she was wrong, as Robina paid no attention to her, walked past her and ran to Theo. The girl realized that the blonde wasn't worried about her, but about the guy, as she was afraid the same thing would happen to him that had happened to Evan. But the guy had said his foot hurt. Viola, on the other hand, returned to the exhibition hall. She realized that Theo and Robina were too friendly. And then Viola saw the Duke near the window, who was looking at the garden. He had noticed that Lady Robina cared more for Franz than for her. The girl herself realized that something was wrong, as looking closely at Robina's reaction raised many questions and doubts. But this may only be a beauty's assumption, but it's worth looking at the situation from a different angle. After all, if you think about it, the past Viola had stolen a man from the blonde, copied her paintings, and it's pretty hard to be nice and polite with someone like that. But she tried. But Viola decided to believe that Robina is a good person and wait for him to open his heart to her. But the Duke didn't care much about that, but the fact that there was a problem with her hand did. That flattered the girl, but she asked him if he should go see Robina and Theo at the park. After all, if you think about it, right now his soulmate is walking in the park with another man, so Evan should be jealous. But the man didn't understand why he should be jealous of the blonde. Viola had said it would be proof of his love. But at this moment, the Duke was more concerned about Viola's condition, but she didn't understand why this was happening. So she admonished that he should take such a good chance, and her wrist was fine. But then someone appeared behind her back. Theo walked into the room with Robina. The man was angry because he thought the reason she refused was because of the other man. Theo was quite angry and wanted to call the girl a bad word. He accused the red-haired girl of trying to seduce the Duke and began to approach her. Viola turned to Evan and asked him to get out of here with her, since Theo looked dangerous and scared her. At this point, Franz decided that he had the moral right to teach Viola a lesson and punish her, and to do so he swung. The girl realized that he would hit her, so she wanted it to happen quickly, and she could withstand one blow. But nothing happened, and the girl opened her eyes to figure out what was going on. She was shielded from the bully by the Duke's broad back. He intercepted the offender's arm and said that such behavior was unacceptable for a man. At this point, the Duke looked at Viola and asked her if he was now an assertive enough man to please her. Now the Duke looked cool, and an energy inexpressible in words emanated from him. Viola realized that he wasn't talking about himself, but about Theo, who was not a man to her, but trash. But the swarthy guy growled angrily that Evan should stay out of it. But the Duke was of a different opinion. He didn't understand how a self-respecting man could stand by when someone raised his hand against a woman. After saying this, he shifted his gaze to Lady Robina and asked if he was right or wrong. The lady didn't know what to say, so she remained silent, and the Duke hoped his actions didn't make her uncomfortable. Robina, however, replied that Evan should have done that. Other visitors to the exhibit began to converge on the noise, which Theo didn't like. The blonde tried to be nice and even blushed as she thanked Duke and apologized to Viola for her friend's behavior. She reached out her hand to the man, but the man didn't like the gesture. and asked her to stop and not touch him. He started to leave with a quick step, but Viola stood in his way and he asked briskly to make way for him. But there was no reaction from the girl's side, so a collision could not be avoided. The girl covered her eyes and asked if the Duke was all right. He pressed her to the floor and their bodies made contact. Their position was defiant and quite provocative. The girl and the Duke fell to the floor after the collision, and the man was on top of the woman, and she did not realize what was happening now. Silence hung in the hallway. Only the strong beating of their hearts could be heard. Though the man looked like he was about to faint, he was more concerned with Viola's condition. The girl said she was fine and asked him to move away a little. The man was embarrassed and apologized for his behavior. The Duke stood up. This gave the girl a chance to get up as well. She noticed that she had bruised her wrist even more when she fell. At that moment, Robina came up to her and noticed that her friend had hurt her arm badly. But Viola began to deny it, that it was no big deal. The Duke behind her back looked unimpressed. But he wasn't looking out for himself now. He was looking out for her, and he said it couldn't be left like that. So he walked over to the girl, touched the edge of her glove and pulled it toward him, and led her on. And he did it in front of everyone, which caused a wave of discussion behind their backs. The girl had nothing to do but obediently follow the Duke in an unknown direction through the corridors of this estate. The man, however, was walking too fast, and the girl began to fail to keep up with him, so she asked him to wait. But the Duke ignored her request, and then he stopped, turned his head toward her, and she asked him what he was going to do now. But Evan pretended not to understand her, and that made the beauty angry, since now everyone around her would think she was a liar. The Duke assured her that he had no such intentions, but Viola was angry at the outcome of what had happened. She didn't understand why things had turned out the way they had, for even if he had needed to avoid Robin at that moment, but why what had happened had happened. Besides, he was taking her somewhere and they were alone, and everyone would think she was stealing her friend's man again. He didn't care about the gossip. The man took a handkerchief out of his pocket and began to apply it to the girl's wound, as he was concerned about the fact that she had hurt herself. Using his handkerchief, he bandaged her wound, which surprised the girl. The girl did not understand his act. After all, this wound could be easily cured at home, but the Duke mouthed that she was an artist, and the beauty began to realize why he did so. At this point, they started talking about Viola's painting, and Evan admitted that he thought it was terrible, which offended the girl. He thought so for a reason. The Duke said that this picture is as absurd as its creator, because the girl, although she decided to love herself, but does not care about her health and does not understand men at all. Viola wilted and asked him not to speak so frankly about her and her paintings from now on. But after a pause, Evan added that for some inexplicable reason, this is a picture you want to look at. The Duke reminded the girl that she was sure for some reason that everyone would think she was a liar, and she confirmed it, since earlier she had said that she would no longer copy Robina's style and paintings and steal men from her. But it looked quite the opposite. But Evan said it was nothing since he wasn't Robina's man. After all, he hadn't chosen a Vesta yet, and had no idea where such rumours came from in society. Viola, however, contradicted him, saying that he was going to marry her friend anyway. The man did not deny it. At this point, he smiled and said he wasn't married. Back at home, Viola lay on her bed and thought. She suddenly realised very clearly that Evan was not a castrato. On the contrary, he seems more like a gentle and loving man. At this point, her musing was interrupted by a knock on the door. She allowed entry. Her maid came into the room and brought water for washing and a clean towel. Jenna said she had been informed by Madame Marietta that Viola had hurt her wrist, which was why she had come to see her mistress now. Viola realised that it had probably happened the moment she got home, but it seemed to her at the time that Madame hadn't noticed anything. But since the situation was such, Viola asked Jenna to come closer and sit down. The maid came over and knelt in front of her. This made Viola a little tense, as she had not at all expected the maid to kneel down in front of her and start making excuses and apologising. The girl realised that the maid was afraid of her, so she decided to remedy the situation. To do this, she approached the frightened girl and told her that she didn't need to kneel down for no good reason. Besides, she wanted the maid to sit next to her on the bed. She also asked the maid to stop asking for forgiveness through word of mouth, as it wasn't her fault that she had hurt her hand. All of Mistress's instructions and wishes pleased the girl, and she said she understood and thanked her for everything. She then sat down on the bed next to her mistress and began to treat her wound. Everything went on as usual. Viola did not attend the art club for a long time, for obvious reasons. The first cause was her arm. It was badly swollen and prevented her from using her hand freely. The second reason is another persistent man in Viola's past life. This beau, the current girl, did not let the current girl on the doorstep, but he climbed the fence, shone almost naked torso, and said that he wore a shirt with strings, all as she likes. It was certainly spectacular and hard to look away, but the girl knew it couldn't be done that way. Each new man surprised the girl more and more and made her blush. She had no idea how many of them Viola had, but it was hard to imagine how she could draw from life looking at something like this. Now she was drawing so much and so often that she was bored with it. She was brought out of her thoughts by Rubina's voice, who was looking at one of her pieces and asking what it depicted. Viola pouted and said she was bored sitting at home, so she came here to draw. Rubina immediately began to apologize, saying that she was very busy, that's why she didn't come to see Viola, but the protagonist said that her wound was not serious, but still she didn't want to see anyone in those days. Viola asked her friend what she was doing, and Rubina replied that she had been invited to teach fine arts at the academy. This news pleased Viola, as she thought it would be perfect for her. But the blonde was more interested in what was going on between Viola and the Duke. The girl was once again at the centre of rumours, and once again had to try on the role of the villainess. But it was her friend's request as a knicker after all. But, after the Duke's words, she began to doubt, and asked her friend if she had really arranged an engagement with Evan. The blonde replied that she probably was. This made Viola suspicious, as she realised that her friend might be hiding something important from her. So she decided to get the truth, and reported that the Duke told her personally that there was no engagement. This surprised Rubina, but she started to say that she thought they were engaged. But in fact it turns out they're not actually engaged, and Viola herself helped her with that. In addition, the Duke was the first to decide to cancel all the arrangements he had with the girl's family. And maybe it was a good thing that it had worked out that way. But Rubina wondered how Viola had managed to get Evan's heart. Soon, Rubina changed the subject and said that the academy director wanted to meet with her. It turned out that the principal liked the painting in the exhibition, so the woman wanted to offer Viola to teach at the academy too. After saying that, the girl got ready to leave, saying that they would see each other at the academy meeting. Viola was shocked as she thought she was a bad teacher. 160438. But as luck would have it, Viola went to the academy to meet with the principal. And then there was another encounter. The girl ran into her father, who asked where she was going. The man was a little nervous for some reason, even though she said she was going to meet with the academy director. The girl suggested that her dad's surprise is that she has stopped bringing home boyfriends and has taken up painting exclusively. The man's face still showed no emotion, but he began to answer her at least one-word answers. So Viola arrived at the academy and walked into the academy principal's office. The principal looked excited as she was looking forward to this meeting, so she immediately got up from the table and started walking towards the girl. She was quite close by now and shook hands with the beautiful woman. But Viola did not come empty-handed. She brought her paintings with her so that the director could evaluate them. And only then, the girl was ready to give an answer to the job offer. Taking out all the works, the girl said that they were very different from most. But that was the reason why she was invited to teach at the academy. And all would have been fine. But here Viola was not ready to teach students, especially with conventional methods. But this only further strengthened the director's opinion that he had made the right choice. And so the audience at the art academy came to an end. The principal was as friendly as possible, explained all about the learning process, and allowed us to look around the neighbourhood. And then she saw a couple. It was Rubina and the guy who had come to see her, sitting on the fence and about to undress right there. They were hugging each other now. Rubina's hand rested on his chest, and he said he had done exactly as she had told him. But there were no significant changes, so the couple was puzzled. It was about some girl who had become very strange lately. But since he failed to do any of the necessary things, he won't get a reward from Rubina this time. The blonde, on the other hand, acted completely different, and spoke too. She said she didn't like whining and ordered the man to go and find out what she needed to know. Viola, on the other hand, was hiding too far away to hear what they were talking about. But the whole situation was very ambiguous. It hadn't occurred to her that this girl was in the academy park and had another angelic friend. At that moment, the protagonist realised that all that kindness and politeness on the blonde's part was a sham. The girl naively thought that such a bold Rubina would be easier to be friends with, but she behaved quite differently in her normal life. Viola continued to think it was Rubina who was the main character in the story. and realized that it would be too boring if she was too kind. The red-haired girl decided to leave the academy grounds. She was upset by her friend's reaction to the situation with the Duke, but now, when she saw her with another man, she calmed down a little. As Viola was walking down the corridor of the academy, she was called out by the Duke and asked what she was doing here. But similar questions were rolling around in her head as well, so she voiced them. His answer was succinct. It was he who was the sponsor of the institution. She came here because of her paintings. Evan asked her if she would teach painting here. Viola was a little resentful of him. She said she would teach, even though he thought her paintings were terrible. The man, on the other hand, looked at her tenderly and said he didn't mean it, but the girl was sure he did. On top of that, the Duke started laughing, but blushed cutely. At this point, Evan had made up his mind that he would come to listen to her lectures sometime, but the girl objected. She was sure he would be disappointed, but the man had a different opinion. Viola realized that Evan was quite cunning and wouldn't stop teasing her every chance he got, so she decided to answer him in the same way. But suddenly someone called out to her again, and the girl turned around. It was that guy again, the one who was ready to get things off his chest, and he was the one who was asking her what she was doing at the academy. He started pestering her again, saying that he had asked her to meet him so many times, and she had turned him down. But the girl was already annoyed, and said that it was because he was wearing the wrong clothes. This guy assumed she was fed up, and she said that yes, she doesn't like men who look at other women. The man was literally shaking by now. He clenched his fists and screamed that the girl couldn't do this to him. After all, he had given her everything he had. The boy wanted to touch the girl, but his hand was stopped by the Duke, who hugged her and said that she didn't understand anything about men. And Evan decided to dot the I's and T's. He hugged the girl even tighter and said that from now on they were dating. So he asked this guy not to seek any more meetings with his lady of the heart. Several days had passed since that moment. Viola came to work at the academy and did not understand the logic of the Duke's actions. She didn't see him after that incident, because after the hug, he collapsed and spent several days in a fever. Viola was very worried, but knew she needed to pull herself together. After all, she was at work, not on a walk. But she had other things to worry about at the moment. Not a single student showed up for her class. The auditorium was empty. The girl was walking down the corridor of the academy and realized that there was something wrong with the lecture, and it was most likely faked. Here she came across an office that was very crowded with students. There were even a few standing near the door that didn't have enough room inside. She herself was curious as to who was teaching the class and peeked into the office like the other girls. Expectedly, it was a lecture by Lady Rubina, who harmonized with the interior of the study and explained the material lucidly. The reason for this hype was because Rubina was good at drawing, but not only that. And to confirm her hunch, Viola decided to ask one of the female students why she was standing here, since there were no seats in the office. It's simple. It was an open class, because the instructor said she wanted everyone to understand what her classes represented. And this is where it got really messy, as Viola suggested this type of class to the principal, since Rubina found out about it and what she was doing now. And then the girl remembered that the headmistress was acting a little strange and said that no one had ever conducted such lessons before at the academy. So she got suspicious, and the girl decided to go to the principal's office and explain everything. But the supervisor had no idea that Rubina was now holding an open class, or pretended not to know. But her friend right now was holding an open class that she was going to teach. The principal thought that such a coincidence really looked strange. But the woman admitted that Rubina had visited her earlier, and they had talked about the lessons Viola had offered to teach. Viola realized that there was definitely no mistake in all of this, so she gathered her things and walked down the hallway at a brisk pace. The girl gathered her things and was about to go home, but then she looked out the window. It was the window to Rubina's office, and the girls met each other's gazes. At that moment, Viola had the feeling that her friend was just waiting for this, as she immediately smiled at her and waved. The protagonist realized that her girlfriend was showing her superiority in this way. It was hard to deny that everything done was intentional and Rubina's doing. The problem was also that even if she went to find out, Rubina would pretend she didn't know anything, apologize and cry, and she would gain notoriety again. Viola was pained at the thought of being betrayed by her friend, for even after seeing her true face, the girl had ignored it, and the one who had driven a knife into her back. But since the blonde is doing this to her in this way, and she already has a bad reputation, so she decided to act too. Viola decided to show her strength, and that you shouldn't touch crazy people. though the girl was determined to teach her rival a lesson. But now she had another problem, a future lesson. She had no idea what she could do to get the students' attention. Suddenly, the girl discovered the personal diary of the former heroine of the novel. So in search of useful information, she decided to read it. From the beginning, it was about Robin, which suggests that the girls have been good friends in the past. But the longer she read this diary, she believed her eyes less and less. The information in the diary was different and very different from the plot of the novel she had read before. So the gist of it is that it started out pretty positive. She loved drawing a lot, her parents were supportive and praised her, saying she had talent. In everything, the girl was helped by her friend Rabina, and praised her work and proved to be a great friend. But after a while, strange and incomprehensible events began to happen. Men were the first to start paying attention to her. Each new suitor showed Viola inexplicable care and attention. The girl assumed she deserved the extra attention by being friends with Rabina. That wasn't the only problem. She found her drawing style quite interesting. But Rabina told her that her style looked ugly and taught the girl to use her own when drawing. The more Viola used her friend's painting technique, the more her paintings began to resemble Rabina's. Then it turned out that all the men who were courting Viola turned out to be her friend's men, and gave the impression to the people around her that she had stolen each of them. In time, it was Rabina who offered to teach Viola how to paint from nudes when she became more confident with the brush. But one day the girl met a man. This young man, unlike the others, didn't like touching at all and kept quite reserved. It was then that she realized that she no longer cared what others would say about her, as there was someone who believed her no matter what she said. It was the first time Viola had ever felt such excitement in her life. But the man said he had a lover, so Viola decided to wish him happiness, while suggesting that this stranger could be Rabina. It was then that Viola wished for the first time in her life that her friend would disappear. It happened that picturing the couple, Evan and Rabina, happily walking to the wedding, Viola's heart hurt. On that note, the current Viola finished reading the journal. In order to gather her thoughts, she began to breathe deeply and reflect. But even after that, she realized she couldn't forgive her friend. The next day came and a new working day at the academy began. Evan was the only one who came to Viola's class, and he didn't expect to see such a picture. Therefore, the man assumed that Viola was holding one-on-one sessions. But it wasn't, and it seemed to the girl that he was mocking her, for no one showed up for class. But suddenly a new idea came into her head. But to realize it, the girl asked the Duke for help, and he agreed. At this point, Evan noticed the painting, but he thought the students were supposed to be painting in class. But it was an unfinished work, and only the first step. The continuation was supposed to happen in class. Something was happening in the square. People began to talk as they noticed Lady Viola doing something strange. One of the girls said Viola wasn't some kind of peddler, so they didn't understand why she was looking for a place there. But having found a place, the artist began to paint, or rather paint over the finished work with black paint, which surprised the townspeople. The girls came closer. One of them said that no one had signed up for Lady Viola's lessons, and the other suggested that she wanted to organise an exhibition, but this painting was not suitable for that. They thought that the girl wanted to draw attention to herself. That's why it's hard to call it a picture. At that moment, the black-haired girl noticed the Duke beside Viola. The watchers couldn't figure out what Duke Evan was doing here. They assumed Viola had seduced him like the others before. At this point, Viola looked at her assistant herself. He looked sexy, even with the colouring, and she thought she was the one infatuated with him, not him with her. And when they finished covering the painting with black paint, the girl turned to the crowd and asked to join them. Viola said it was a simple workshop that they could join and try to replicate, because they were also curious about what she was painting. But the female observers didn't understand what they could draw on a ruined painting. This convinced one of the girls, and she decided to participate, but asked not to be disappointed. So the third stage began. Viola picked up the stick and said that if you scratch it where it's painted black, from beneath the layer of black paint, bright lines of pattern appeared. It looked like magic. No one had ever seen such an artistic technique before. There was a man in the crowd in the square. He said that although he didn't understand anything about art, but this painting was unique and looked masterpiece. The girl thanked him for saying that. Belle was happy. She wanted all people to realize how interesting it is. After all, each drawing can be part of something bigger and more complete. The girl believed that all people can draw, not just those with innate talent. Her classes are open to everyone, even those who can't draw, as she teaches students how to express themselves and enjoy the process through a variety of techniques. That was the end of Viola's first class, and those around her started asking when they could sign up for classes. This pleased the beauty. The Duke was looking at her fondly at this moment. The girls in the crowd decided to go and hurriedly sign up for classes, as they were afraid there might not be any seats left, with Robina withdrawing behind them. This success of Viola's must have upset Robina a lot, as she didn't look her best standing around the corner. At the academy, Viola was called to her by the principal, and the girl went into her office. The woman rejoiced and said she regretted not noticing the girl's talent earlier. But now all the seats for her class were taken, and students were asking for one more extra class. Viola apologized for not alerting the director, but the director said it was okay, and the girl could do whatever she wanted, and the management would give her the support she needed. Therefore, the protagonist happily agreed to more lessons. The girl, joyful and happy, went to get her things, but when she got to the place where she had left them, but her painting supplies were not there. It was a loss of loss, as they were given to her by her daddy, and the girl had been saving these tools for liveliness and keeping them new, and now they were gone. So she started looking for them in sweat everywhere she could, but they were nowhere to be found. But they had her name on them, so the girl decided to go home, but went so deep into her thoughts that she ran into a young man and almost fell, but he was able to catch her. Viola, though she was glad not to fall, and the guy was sweet and handsome, she was in a hurry, but she promised to give him a picture as a token of her gratitude next time. The girl realized that her paintings were not yet good enough to give them to people, but she hoped that she might become the future Picasso, and so, tired, she returned home. The first one home to greet her was Jenna, the maid, fearing that her mistress's idea had failed, and then handed Viola a letter that had arrived in her name a short time ago. The letter stated that her art supplies were in the Duke's possession, and if she wanted them back, she had to come to his estate. And Viola had no choice but to go, but she decided to do it tomorrow and asked Jenna to help her pack. Besides, the girl informed her family at home that she would now be working at the academy, and she had added lessons, so she would be travelling there often. Her parents, on the other hand, stared at her intently and tried to understand her mood and intentions. Viola was happy. She had won over everyone at the academy. The next day, Viola was going to go to the Duke, and Janae promised to draw with her when she got home. The maid saw the girl off and wished her a happy journey and that she would be welcome home. It looked really nice. Viola had originally planned to practice on the maid, but she really enjoyed it and looked forward to each lesson. So the girl thought that maybe she had a teaching ability. And then when she left the house, she saw that Robina was waiting for her in the yard. It surprised her quite a bit, and the blonde with an innocent look began to ask where her friend was going. Viola announced that she was going to the Duke's estate. This surprised Robin. The red-haired girl wanted to say that Robina herself had said that she didn't like the Duke, then what was wrong with her face now? But she had to say otherwise, namely that she had to meet him, and asked what had brought her friend to her. The blonde got embarrassed and said she just wanted to talk to her girlfriend, but apparently came at the wrong time for that. But Viola decided to play as well as Robin, so she offered the girl to go with her. After all, the Duke sent a carriage for her specifically for that purpose. Robina agreed. The girls sat opposite each other in the carriage. The blonde pretended to be very happy that the Duke and Viola were doing well. They arrived at the Duke's manor and got out of the carriage and stood in the courtyard. Robina said she was always worried about Viola, for they were friends, and she had been acting strangely and unlike herself lately. And Viola couldn't stand it and asked what it looked like. The red-haired beauty asked her friend how she sees her. Is she still a puppet to Robina who does whatever she wants? I wonder what she's thinking when the girl naively trusts her. But Robina continued her usual demeanour, saying she was worried about her since R&M are best friends. But Viola objected, saying that she was doing fine on her own, and she was doing well at the academy too, since she'd even had her work hours added. To Robina, what her friend was drawing on the floor looked very strange and wrong. But that wouldn't have happened if someone hadn't ruined her first class at the academy. But in the end, Viola was even grateful to the person who tried to hurt her, as she now had even more lessons than she had bargained for. Robina, on the other hand, didn't believe it. She thought her friend was making it up, as she didn't believe anyone needed or wanted to interfere with her. Besides, Robina liked the paintings that the girl had created earlier much better. Viola said that from now on, she would no longer draw using her friend's style, which surprised her, because she thought she liked it. Afterward, Viola asked Robina why she was so pushy, why she was making her do what she wanted to do. Viola said she had to go, because the Duke missed her very much and was waiting for her. That's why she was going to visit him. Plus, The red-haired beauty was glad that no engagement had taken place between her friend and Evan. Then she turned around and told Robina that if her friend wasn't being touched by the Duke, she was being gently hugged by him. So Viola walked into Evan's house, which looked much more luxurious and beautiful than Robina's house. The girl's mouth even opened in admiration. The man asked her to calm down a little. The girl asked him why it was necessary to organise this visit, since he could have given her things at the academy. But he felt that the girl was very busy at work, and it would be more convenient that way. And then the man invited the girl to come inside and looked amazing while doing so. And now they have already passed into the interior. The girl noticed that there were many stares of the servants, who were shocked by her appearance here. Viola noticed that there were no maids in the house, and assumed it was because of his illness. Evan agreed that she was the first woman he'd brought into the house. The man smiled and reminded the girl that she was the first person he was so close to, but would probably be the last. It sounded like a declaration of love, which made the girl's heart beat much faster. After that, Evan said that he wanted to thank the girl, so he invited her to have tea with him. And so they sat in the room, and behind the Duke's back hung the picture from the lesson they had made together. But the girl insisted on her own, and demanded that the man return her belongings immediately. Evan was patient and hospitable, and offered to start with a cup of tea, as such an opportunity does not come to everyone, to drink tea with him. Nevertheless, the Duke showed leniency and decided to let the girl go, saying that they would see each other tomorrow. He handed her things to her, ushered her out the door, and said he would tell her to get a carriage ready for her. Viola's mind was racing with thoughts of what she was doing here. 139620. Viola was going to work at the academy. She was encouraged by the fact that everyone had enjoyed yesterday's lesson in the square, and so she was sure that she would do well today. She was already approaching her office when she saw a crowd of people at the door, among them the young man who had recently saved her from falling to the ground. The man was good-looking, tall, stately, well-dressed. She hadn't realised he was a lecturer at the academy. He turned to her, smiled, and asked if she had solved the problem she had recently had. This behaviour of his fascinated her, and the girl could only reply that yes, she had managed to work things out. At that moment, the girl remembered that she had promised to give him her painting, so she asked the young man if he had time today. He replied that he was free. When Viola heard that, she invited him to her lesson, which was about to start. That was what he was after, so the man smiled contentedly and introduced himself. His name was Kyle Balow. The girl looked at the man and didn't understand where such an effect could have come from. Perhaps it was the fact that they were inside an affair. It felt like Kyle was glittering, and Viola thought that of course Duke was very cool, but this guy wasn't inferior to him either. When she entered the auditorium, she was pleasantly surprised as the room was practically filled with students. She knew full well that she had a lot of people signed up for her lessons, but seeing it for herself was much more enjoyable. At that moment the doors opened with a bang and a tardy student ran into the auditorium. It was Evan. He was breathing heavily, sweating and blushing, apologising for being late and wiping the sweat away with his jacket sleeve. His appearance won Viola's heart, as she found sweaty men very attractive and sexy. The girl caught herself just in time, as she realised she was thinking about the wrong thing, and asked the Duke to take an empty seat as class had just started. Viola took a serious look, leaned her hands on the table and said that she was very happy to see everyone. So they were starting their first class right now. And the first thing she decided to do was to show the students what they would be doing today. So she hung a picture on the board. There was a silent pause in the audience, as there was no sample picture and a blank sheet of paper hanging on the blackboard. This couldn't just go away, and the first disgruntled person raised their voice. The lady asked the teacher where the drawing itself was that needed to be drawn, and Viola, as if nothing had happened, pointed to the blank piece of paper again and said that she had specially prepared this for the demonstration. But the student thought it was not a funny joke or even a mockery. But the girl was not offended and said that now everyone would get a piece of paper and a special tool with which they would have to draw their picture. The idea was to draw on paper their feelings and thoughts that they didn't dare to say for good reasons. Evan and Kyle listened intently. Viola enthusiastically offered to draw with the object, since no one would see what they were depicting anyway. And the moment they dare to show others their work, they will do so. So each of the students could draw whatever they wanted, and not be afraid that someone would judge or laugh at their artistic abilities, because no one would see anything. Everything was fine, but Viola could feel Evan's intense gaze on her. This behaviour from the man made her a little angry and embarrassed as she told everyone to draw, not gawk at her at all. But the Duke only laughed and looked very sweet at that moment. Half of the lesson had passed, and the girl noticed that almost all the students had finished their work. After that, Viola picked up her brush and said that the topic of the lesson was mystery drawing. But like she said earlier, she had prepared hers beforehand. She went on and said that if you paint a picture with any colour paint, what was painted starts to show up. In her case, it was the sky. Viola was sure that even if it seemed that if you couldn't see the right path because of the clouds, you had to remember that they would dispel and a bright blue, clear sky would appear. On that note, the girl ended her first class. The students were very happy with the class, and Viola was sure those smiling people would come to the next class as well. The girl also started to put her drawing supplies into the case, but at that moment someone called out to her. Kyle came up to her with his drawing and asked the girl to accept it, which surprised her as she didn't understand why he would give his work to her specifically. The man explained. He thought it was an ordinary drawing lesson, but her teaching method was different from the others, so this drawing was his thanks to her for the fascinating lecture. Viola, though embarrassed and surprised, accepted the gift gratefully. He bowed out and said that if he had a chance he would come to her class again. The girl said she would be glad to see him and waved goodbye. Evan watched. At that moment, the Duke walked over to the girl, handed her his drawing and asked her to accept it too. Evan wanted Viola to look only at his work and ignore the drawing Kyle had given her. But as a teacher, Viola couldn't help but look at Kyle's drawing. But she promised that Evan's work would be looked at first. She said they couldn't be called close, but admitted that Kyle had helped her by catching the girl as she fell. This angered the Duke. He began to ask where that man had touched her. Such a question surprised the girl. She explained that by the waist, not by the neck. It looked like he was jealous. Em here was the girl at home and was going to see what the Duke had drawn, since he was so insistent on it. So she did a colour fill of the Duke's painting and saw the blue sky and the girl. Then she realised that the Duke was trying to paint her. That's why he was watching her closely during the lesson. This masterpiece was amusing to watch, considering Evan had a low opinion of her abilities, while he himself had them at the level of a 3-year-old. But it greatly mortified the girl, and she decided to put the drawing in a beautiful frame. Kyle, on the other hand, was a professional artist, and Viola's portrait looked amazing, as if the girl had come to life on paper. At that moment, Jenna came into the room and brought her a written invitation from Lady Robina for her birthday. So Viola got ready for the party. As she was about to go out, she was seen by her parents who were passing by. The girl chose a long red dress and bare her shoulders. Her parents noted that she looks very beautiful today. But her mum was concerned about where her daughter was going in such an outfit. The girl replied that she was going to a place where she had no right to lose. At this point, her father spoke up. He understood that if that was her goal, then she needed to be helped into it. So he pulled out a jewellery box that belonged to his wife. The father gave his daughter a dainty pendant, as he thought her outfit looked incomplete without this piece of jewellery, and his girl should win wherever she goes. Viola was grateful, for the pendant and earrings had belonged to her mother, and her father had given them to her with unwavering confidence. At Robina's house, Viola was immediately met by the Duke. He noted that the dress and jewellery suits her very well. The girl thanked him for the compliment, but then asked what he was doing at Robina's birthday party. Viola, on the other hand, thought it was wrong and not customary to attend the parties of people you hadn't married. But Evan assured her that he hadn't come here for the blonde. Then he said he came here for her and began to slowly remove his jacket. After that, he gently slipped it over the girl's shoulders, saying that her outfit on display was much prettier and he liked it better. After all, she was beautiful, and it was not necessary to flaunt her body for that. And the girl was embarrassed. She realised that if he kept acting like this, she might fall in love with him. At that moment, the girl heard her friend's voice saying that she was glad to see her. Viola realised she couldn't give in to Robina, so she said she was glad to be here too. The people around continued to talk. They realised that the rumours were true and noticed the Duke's jacket on Viola's shoulders. Robina, like a true lady, thanked them for coming, but then, as if by the way, asked what kind of clothes her friend was wearing. Viola decided to annoy her friend and told her in confidence that Evan didn't like it when other men looked at her bare shoulders, so he gave her his jacket. The girl counted everything. She realised that after those words her friend couldn't control her facial expression and other emotions. So it was at this point that she handed the blonde her gift, saying that she wasn't sure if she would like it or not. The The crowd was buzzing again. Everyone knew that every year Viola gave her friend paintings, but they didn't understand what the point of these gifts were if they were only copies of the birthday girl herself. Rubina, however, had nowhere to go, so she smiled as always and accepted the gift. Viola stood back contentedly, for she was curious to see how her friend would behave when she saw what she had drawn. After all, it was an unusual painting technique. The painting depicted a gardenia tree done in mosaic style. Then she added that she always thought those white flowers looked like Rubina, which is why she was giving her this one-of-a-kind painting. The essence of this plant is simple. With its aroma, it attracts a large number of insects and causes rapid wilting of the flower. This plant has a beautiful flowering appearance, but when it wilts, it becomes horrible. Rubina, on the other hand, held up the painting and asked whether or not Viola would return to her previous style of painting. She grabbed her friend by the shoulders afterward and started asking her why she's only been drawing pictures like this lately. Viola, on the other hand, confirmed that she will no longer be painting in Rubina's style, as her art has become too distant for her. But her friend insisted that she wants to see her former work. Viola, on the other hand, didn't understand why Rubina insisted that she continue copying her. The people gathered also thought it was rather strange. It's especially baffling when you consider that she was accused of plagiarism the whole time, while Rubina pretended not to realize anything about it. At that moment, Viola had made up her mind and said out loud that she would no longer shadow her friend, and then decided to promote her classes, telling them that if they signed up, their work could never be repeated or copied, that she would teach them new drawing techniques. After that, she turned around and started to leave the hall, saying that she and Rubina would meet at the academy tomorrow. Following her, the Duke also came out, who was following her movements with an unreadable expression on his face, and even blushed at this. After the party, Viola visited the largest art shop in town and bought the necessary materials for lessons. Besides, she was downtown now and decided to check out the other stores as well. But someone touched her shoulder from behind. That someone turned out to be Kyle, who sort of happened to meet her. The man said he paints from time to time, which is why he decided to stop by the store and buy some things he needed to do so. At that moment, he asked her if she was going to the academy or not as a carriage appeared behind him, and the girl accepted his offer to give her a ride, but she wondered why he went to her lessons, since he was a great painter himself. The man admitted that he attends her classes to see her one extra time. Kyle added that he'd fallen in love with her gentle image when he'd first seen her behind the lectern in the auditorium, and couldn't help it. This struck Viola, since there didn't seem to be anything in the book about the villain having an affair with a handsome man like Kyle. Now the protagonist was glad that the author had condescended to her and prescribed love with this man. So the carriage brought the heroes to the academy. Kyle gave the girl his hand so she could step out of the carriage more carefully. Thus they sewed out of the carriage and stood beside the carriage. The man continued to hold her hand. Viola thanked him for giving her a ride and for helping her out, and then the Duke began to approach them. Evan's facial expression initially expressed displeasure, but then he smiled and started introducing himself to Kyle. And the men shook hands and pretended to be glad to make such a pleasant acquaintance with each other. Such behavior was incomprehensible to the girl, as the two had already seen each other in the last class. At this time, Kyle looked at Viola and said that he would walk her to her office and deliver the box. Then the Duke raised his voice and said that he himself could take the girl's things to the study, so Kyle could be free to go. The men continued to argue with each other about who would carry the girl's things. The girl stood back and began to get angry with them. So she shouted that she would carry her own things to the office and they should stop arguing and follow her, since class was about to start. So, the theme of this lesson was marbling, which is a painting technique that mimics marble. This is a special technique of drawing in which you need to add a drop of oil paint to water, and then on top of it, you had to put a piece of paper, which will display just the drawing. And some students, who were the first to finish their works, saw that after the manipulations, their patterns on the paper looked like real marble. Viola concluded from the students' reactions that all the students were very happy with their results and the girl's lesson. The girl hoped Evan had gotten something nice and concise this time too, but as soon as she looked at Duke, she knew something was going to be wrong. And then she saw his work, and it was something awful. His painting wasn't pretty, and the girl realized he was even more talentless than she thought. Duke said that the drawing depicted his emotions, and the girl realized that her student was angry. Evan sighed and asked Violetta to be careful, but the girl didn't understand what he meant. The Duke explained that all the men who courted Viola were as strange as possible. Viola thought that the Duke should also beware, but she couldn't say it out loud and kept silent. The man thought that she was too naive, so he says all this because he cares about her, because all men are wolves, except him. And the girl realized that she was the most dangerous one here, as she had made many attempts to make the Duke pose in nude style. To improve the man's mood, she offered to draw a picture as a reward for his efforts in this class. And so Viola drew him a mini picture, showed it to the Duke. The man was embarrassed, as he hadn't expected to see such a thing. The girl drew a cute and sweet heart with red paint and presented it to Evan. The man accepted the gift and looked at it carefully and intently. There was silence, and Viola didn't know what he thought. Evan blushed, covered part of his face with his hand, and said he would think on her suggestion in a positive way. The girl realized that the man took her drawing as a declaration of love, so she asked the young man to look at the other students' work before leaving. After that, the girl took her place behind the pulpit and informed everyone that this was the end of the lesson and everyone could go home. She asked that their drawings be left on their desks to dry so that the students could continue to create new masterpieces for next time. Viola noticed that everyone had done very well out of the task today, and then she noticed Kyle's work. The young man drew a beautiful landscape instead of completing a clear lesson activity. Looking at it, she didn't understand why he would attend her lessons. The man recognized that the technique taught by the girl was interesting and quite curious. But Viola was interested in how he was able to paint such a masterpiece with a minimal amount of colors. But he said nothing on the subject, and asked her to teach the marble technique that was being dismantled in this class. Viola mentally asked him to open his eyes and take a good look at his work, as the scenery was magnificent. She felt at this moment like an amateur who was trying to teach something to a real master. At this time, Duke watched the scene sitting in his seat. He saw Viola hand Kyle a sheet with a heart drawn on it, just like his. And now the Duke was about to leave the auditorium, but he looked at the other tables. On each of them was a sheet with a red heart on it. Viola realized that the man had finally understood what the heart meant, but remembering his words made the girl's heart beat harder. And this statement of the Duke was pleasant to the girl. She would not mind to become his lover, but realized that to heal him can obviously not she. Meanwhile, Viola was about to go home, but she was met at the entrance to the academy by Kyle, who was waiting for her. They walked together, but the girl wished the Duke was here to tease him a little, but he left first. The man noted that each lesson of the girl is very interesting, unusual and creative. He wondered who helps her to come up with such things. She said her first thought was how easy it was to draw a picture. Such an answer seemed very difficult to the man, and from the bushes the Duke was watching them. Viola smiled and said she wished everyone, even the untalented, could try to draw something. And then she heard the Duke's voice. The girl didn't expect him to be here, so she stumbled a little and started to fall. Tacky Viola couldn't resist and fell, but even now she didn't feel the pain of the fall and didn't understand why it was happening. At that moment, Viola realized she was lying on top of the Duke, who gave no sign of life. The man was unconscious, and it was difficult to determine whether he was breathing or not. This situation frightened the girl. Kyle said he would go and get someone to help since Viola was okay. The girl realized that the moment she was falling, the Duke had protected her with his body, hence why she was more hurt. Viola cried as she looked at her savior. The girl sat beside the young man, crying and begging him to wake up quickly. Tears were already streaming down her cheeks. She didn't understand why the Duke wasn't coming to his senses. She promised that she wouldn't make fun of him anymore, and that she wouldn't call him a castrato, even if he was. The girl also promised to overlook his defects, if such even existed. And if she can't do that, she'll take full responsibility for him, just as long as he wakes up soon. The girl was even more worried as she said quite a few strange things, and no one came to their aid. So she decided to personally go and call someone for help. But at that moment, the Duke grabbed her arm. He came to his senses and slowly began to assume a sitting position while asking her to repeat all of the above. The Duke smiled and hugged the girl gently while asking if she would regret her words. The girl didn't understand what was going on, and Evan informed her that he had finished checking. The other question was what he was checking. He wouldn't let her go, saying she was causing him too much trouble of various kinds. Then he gawked at her and told her he was far from impotent. Now recovering from the shock, Viola began to get angry as she thought he was hurt because of her and in death. After that, the girl had a desire to beat him, and very hard. But the man muttered that something strange was happening now. He was curious whether she noticed it or not. Viola thought he was implying that he wasn't dead, so she offered to kill him if that's what he wanted. But no, the point was, The Duke had been hugging her for several minutes now, and then the girl realized that he really hugged her and at the same time did not faint, but smiled sweetly, which means that his lovesickness has passed, but how it could happen she did not understand. And Evan hugged the girl even tighter and said that now he definitely couldn't live without her. Nevertheless, they somehow made it to the hospital wing of the academy and sat side by side in one of the hospital beds. At that moment, Robina came running into the hospital wing and entered the room, asking how Viola was feeling. The girl said she was fine. The Duke was the one who was hurt, but Robina didn't finish listening to her, and then walked past, turning to Evan, asking if he was okay and asking Viola to be more careful. Viola, on the other hand, was curious to see how far Robina could go in her pretense. But the Duke was in no hurry to answer the blonde, and asked Viola to come over to him. But closer to him stood Robina, and she decided to reach out and help the Duke, but he calmly stopped her with one sentence. He asked if the lady was not familiar with the rules of etiquette. The man said he did not allow her to touch him because he was angry because of her attitude towards Viola. The blonde pulled her hand away and said she was just trying to help him. The situation was getting more and more interesting. Robina used her last weapon, tears. Viola smiled. She knew very well that it would not work on the young man, for the Duke did not like weak and timid women. The girl approached her friend and told her that if she thought the Duke would come back to her, he wouldn't, and also added that while before all her men returned after meeting Viola again to Robina, now it's different. So Viola walked past Robina and approached the Duke. The girl placed her hand on the Duke's chest and offered to leave the hospital wing. They embraced, or rather Viola began to support the Duke as they walked towards the door. The girl thought that if they were characters in a fairy tale, Evan was the enchanted princess, and she was the prince who would break the spell. And Robina would definitely be a nobody in this tale. So Evan and Viola left the infirmary and called the carriage. The Duke went home, and the girl waved and wished him a happy journey. She was standing in the academy courtyard. Then Kyle called out to her. Viola had completely forgotten about him, and now he was apologizing for grabbing her arm a little earlier. Viola, on the other hand, said it was no big deal. Anyone could get confused in a situation like this. The girl recognized that if all people were like the Duke, she would look at all people, as she did at him. Kyle asked the girl if she had feelings for Duke. The girl said yes, as the man couldn't do without her. But Kyle decided not to back down and asked what if he was suddenly better than Duke in every aspect. But Viola interrupted him and said that the various criteria were not important to her. For if he had tried to save her, her heart might have trembled then, but it did not. She believed that fortunate timing mattered a lot in this life. He missed his lucky moment, so they aren't destined to be together, though too bad for her. After the whole story, Viola got sick and spent a few days at home in bed. It was not the first time her body reacted in this way to stressful situations. So to get fit, she decided to do some physical training. After all, in her real world, she was a university student and was in the sports department. But her workout was interrupted by Jenna, who asked her to come with her immediately. The girl didn't like it, as she wasn't done yet, but the maid pulled her along, as the matter was very important and urgent. Jenna began to quickly do her mistress's makeup, as she was practicing and didn't look her best. Viola didn't understand what was going on. Viola thought that she didn't have to do her makeup at home, and then the maid realised that she had forgotten to explain to her mistress what was going on. Jenna reported that Duke Evan had come to visit them. Viola asked why he'd done it. At last, Viola was made up and dressed by the maid, so the girl went into the living room. Her mother and the Duke were already waiting for her appearance. But even in a nice dress and with makeup, the girl didn't look happy and questioned what Duke Evan was doing in their house. Viola's mum admitted that she personally invited him to visit them while putting a cup of tea on the table. The woman said, as if nothing had happened, that she had heard that the Duke had saved her daughter and that they were lovers. But the man corrected her, saying that they were just getting to know each other. The woman smiled and said that the rumours turned out not to be rumours, but Viola's father was silent for now. Viola's parents said their daughter is different from other people. Now they noticed that things had improved a bit, but previously no one could stop her, and she liked very specific things. They said that the Duke himself was aware of this. Evan didn't deny that he had heard about their daughter either, as there wasn't a single person in town who hadn't heard of her. And then it came to the girl that her parents were hurling insults at her right in her presence. In addition, the girl's father confessed that he had secretly dealt with all those men who hovered around his little girl. This angered Viola, and she wanted it explained to her what it meant, but her father paid no attention to her indignation and asked the Duke if he liked liquor. This surprised the girl, for her father could not drink at all, and the servant had already brought him a bottle of wine. But then Viola's mother took the bottle from her husband, took a corkscrew and began to open it, saying that the Duke would have to drink with her, and then added that Evan needn't worry, as there were plenty of spare rooms in their house. And then the woman added that if he got really drunk and couldn't drive home, he could spend the night at their house. Poor Evan. He thought he could outdrink and out-argue Viola's mum, but he was wrong, and now he collapsed on the table from intoxication. Afterward, the woman looked at her daughter and called out to her. The woman continued. She said that the Duke had a good reputation, and he denied the rumours of his engagement to Robina, and besides, he didn't seem like a bad man. Meanwhile, Viola's father was trying to lift Evan up and put him in an upright position. When her father began to lead the young man out of the room, her mother and himself said they approved. Viola, on the other hand, didn't quite understand exactly what her mummy was approving of, and the woman smiled slyly and said that the Duke's room would be next to her favourite girl's room. If so, it was a sacred thing to go and see if everything was all right with the man. So Viola quietly opened the door of the room. The girl tried to convince herself that she didn't have any vulgar thoughts, that she just wanted to check if the Duke was asleep or not. She knew it was wrong to come into someone else's room without knocking, but the Duke was so sweet and sleeping so sweetly right now, so it was hard for her to resist. And then Viola realised something was wrong with her, as she wanted to touch the sleeping man's face. Realising this, the girl decided to leave, as she had to keep the Duke safe from herself, but he reached out to her. Evan grabbed Viola's hand, which surprised the girl, and then pulled her sharply towards him. The girl couldn't resist and fell right onto his chest. She realised she needed to get up, but the Duke held her tightly and questioned if this was the way a perverted lady should behave. But as soon as he said that, he fell asleep right away, and Viola began to take offence and adjust his blanket. After that, Evan and Viola continued their communication. But the girl thought that it would not go on like that, and they should do something else. It was important to Viola that the rumours surrounding her person and their relationship were dispelled, so they had to make an effort to do so. So the girl asked the young man if he trusted her. He replied that he trusted her 100%. That was fine, but the society they revolved around had certain prejudices about her person. The beauty realised that no one would believe that Robina herself had asked her to seduce Evan. At that moment, they entered the classroom and saw that all the drawings of Viola's students were lying on the floor and were torn. It was obvious from the tear lines that someone had intentionally done this. This picture did not leave the Duke indifferent. He was silent, but he looked very tense and displeased. What was strange was that only one drawing was unaffected, namely the drawing of Evan he was holding now. The man said that she herself had recently confessed her feelings, and now his heart was torn, so how could she think it didn't matter? This made Viola angry, so she stamped the heart drawing that was originally his into his chest. Evan didn't understand how it had happened. After all, his drawing on the desk had been torn too, and now Viola had given him a whole and unharmed heart. All because the girl foresaw such a development and hid all the students' drawings in a safe place and put her own on the tables. Belle knew that too many people wished her to fail, so she couldn't leave the students' drawings in a prominent place and go home. So when the lesson was over and everyone had left, she hid the students' drawings in a desk drawer and put pre-prepared hearts on the tables. She realised that the student could have guessed what was going on, but it was clearly the work of someone from the outside, which was why they hadn't noticed the switch. Plus, she hadn't believed to the last that such a thing would happen. Evan walked over to the girl, hugged her, and told her that he would talk to the academy authorities and try to fix the situation. The girl nodded. Belle asked the young man to find out who besides students had access to her office while she was sick. She herself thought over the fact that it was for nothing that someone had done it, as she was far from being a god's dandelion and would take revenge. But at that moment, the Duke stroked her chaff. He apologised for not being able to attend class today. He was glad that Viola's students' drawings were okay. And afterward, he said that he would find the culprit, and when he did, he would tear off his hands and feet so that he would not be punished. Interesting. But Evan said scary things like that. But he looked really cute. And the Duke took his drawing and held it to his chest and went about his business. At that moment, Viola realised that she had to make him her man despite all the rumours about her. So it was lesson time. She handed out their drawings to everyone and told them that this work would be a continuation of last week's work. Everyone was drawing, and the lesson was coming to an end. During this time, Viola made sure that there was no criminal among the students. None of them were surprised to see that they had been given whole drawings, and everyone was focused on their new assignment. But there was one student who didn't show up for class, and that was Sir Kyle. There were two possibilities as to why he didn't come. One, he was embarrassed to see her, and two, he was somehow involved in the mayhem in the auditorium. She hoped that neither Robin nor Kyle had torn up the drawings. She realised that she didn't want these people who were so dear to her to fall so low, or Robina would switch places with her. But she was determined to reclaim everything Robina had taken from her. The class was over. The students began to go home. Viola only had to clean up the classroom, and then she could leave. And just at that moment, Duke Evan appeared, who was sure he had found the culprit of the incident. He was out of breath, and the girl could not believe that he had managed to find the culprit so quickly. But he assured her that it was nothing to him. Such a man he was. Here they came to the principal's office, and the Duke continued to bother the girl, though she did not speak of it. There waiting for them were two strange men in long black cloaks who bowed to the Duke and Viola. The girl first noticed their hard muscles, which were hard to hide under their clothes. Evan, on the other hand, muttered that the perpetrator was in the principal's office, and these men were the soldiers Evan had asked for help in the search. Viola thought that Duke was like a puppy waiting for praise from his mistress, so she was itching to pet him. But she held back and said that Evan would get the praise, but only after she talked to the perpetrator and asked him not to enter the office, no matter what strange noises he would hear. So Viola walked into the principal's office. The principal herself was sitting at the desk, and the culprit was a girl, possibly one of Robina's fans, 107440. The criminal did not hide her feelings, so she said loud and clear that she hated Viola. And all because Lady Robina cried because of her, and the girl did not pay attention to it and continued to teach drawing lessons. Such statements, unfortunately, Viola was not surprised by. It was expected. She knew something like this was bound to happen, but she hadn't given up hope that it wouldn't after all. Viola realised that one could hate her and let her, but one would then need to focus all of their attention on her alone, and not try to harm her students. Therefore, Viola calmly said that she understood the feelings of the criminal, but she chose the wrong methods to achieve her goal, because this act could negatively affect her beloved Robina when everyone finds out about it. Since it would be worth it for a girl to tell everyone that she ruined Viola's lesson to help Robina, everyone would look at her with far from respect. The principal watched this dialogue in silence. The perpetrator screamed. She tried to make them believe it had nothing to do with Robina. Even though the brunette had asked to keep her idol out of it, it was too late. As soon as she talked about her behaviour in the context of Robina's life, the matter began to concern her directly. Viola was sure that if the brunette didn't like her because Robina was crying over her, but that didn't give her any moral right to fix harm to the people around her. Besides, it wasn't hard to guess that she'd have to be held accountable for the harm she'd caused. But nevertheless, the perpetrator behaved quite defiantly, and it was difficult to understand the reason for this, though perhaps she was prepared for anything. Viola realised that even if indirectly Robina had encouraged this girl to do such a disgusting act, she would not help her, but make her a scapegoat when everything became public knowledge. Moreover, Robina is bound to pretend she doesn't know anything and cry, as she always does in such situations. She would beg everyone to forgive her friend, and as a result, she would get away with it. But Viola didn't like that, and she wouldn't let it happen this time. The delinquent was starting to get nervous as the silence dragged on, and then Viola said she wouldn't do anything since her lesson had gone smoothly. The brunette started to threaten that it wasn't the last time, but Viola, who was getting up from the padded chair, replied that it probably would be, but she wouldn't suffer any loss next time. And then she came to the girl, leaned over her, and told her that if she touched her people, she would feel the bite of Viola Helen. The beauty told the brunette a secret. This time she didn't tear up any of the students' drawings, as all the torn drawings were her own. After that, the girl's expression changed. She didn't understand why Viola was being so brazen. The criminal mistakenly believed that Viola had taken absolutely everything from Lady Robina, and yet felt no remorse. Viola smiled and said that although she couldn't tell her everything, there was a point she couldn't understand. Belle was interested in what exactly she had been able to take away from Lady Robina. Viola wondered if Robina herself had said that about her. But the brunette objected, saying that everyone already knew that Viola had copied her friend's paintings and then stolen a man from her. It was expected, But Viola decided to clarify the situation to the girl so she wouldn't have any more wrong questions. So first things first, Viola has already apologized for copying paintings and is now pursuing her own path in painting. 2. There's one very good reason why she stole a man from a friend. This angered the brunette, since even if there is a reason, no one has the right to steal from girlfriends their fiancés. And then Viola decided to start another rumor, but at the same time asked to keep all this information secret. Viola admitted that the topic was rather touchy, since in a way, she had indeed stolen a man from Robina. The perpetrator cheered, and Viola continued. She said that Theo, for example, was known for hitting on women and raising his hand to them, so it was for Robina's benefit. Yes, and the others were no better, as they harassed Robina, flaunted their charms in public and so on. That is, they showed no respect for the woman. In other words, Robina was surrounded by only such second-rate men. But the brunette asked about the Duke. It was true, Viola realised, that Evan seemed normal and nice compared to the others. Mentally, Viola apologised to Duke. He wasn't going to date anyone but her anyway, so she walked over to the brunette and told her that Robina had told her in confidence that Evan didn't like her touching him since he was a castrato. This information sent the brunette into a state of shock. The criminal looked at Viola incredulously, and then began to remember that such rumours had appeared in society before. But then the question remained why Viola herself was dating such a man. Evan stood in the hallway, trying to hear what was being said in the office. After all the explanations, the brunette started apologising to Viola, and even wanted to hug her in a burst of emotion. At that very moment, Evan entered the office and asked his lover if she had finished her conversation like that. The girl nodded affirmatively, but the brunette looked at the man silently and intently. But here she was not looking him in the eyes, but her gaze fell to the Duke just below the waist. When the stranger left the office and the academy in general, Evan asked Viola to explain to him her interested gaze directed to a place of interest. Viola started to justify herself, saying that Evan was very handsome, sweet and sexy, so she had called him a castrato, so that other girls wouldn't look at him. The man smiled and said that since it was her fault that he had become a castrate for the whole society, she would have to take all the responsibility. Strangely, the Duke even looked happy while doing so, which made the girl nervous and slightly worried. Viola reminded him that everyone would call him a castrato, but the man didn't really care since she knew the truth. But the problem was that the girl herself couldn't be sure that her boyfriend wasn't castrated, since she hadn't checked it out. But she noted aloud that many people would now feel sorry for him and look at him with sympathy. But it didn't matter to the Duke, as he had made the decision to marry her anyway. And then everyone would know he wasn't castrated, and now other girls wouldn't hit on him, and she wouldn't have to be so wary and tense. Besides, he could think of only one Viola both day and night. It was a real temptation for Viola. She couldn't help herself, reached out and stroked her future husband's head like a kitten. In this way, she was expressing her gratitude to the young man for helping to find the perpetrator of the incident in her classroom. And she was also saying thank you to him for showing her understanding. Evan further puzzled Viola as he asked if that was her answer to him. The man hugged her and asked her to give him some more praise, as he had made a lot of effort, even calling the guards to find the criminal, so he didn't get enough of the praise she gave him. The girl thought of various obscenities, as she was already ready for such things, but decided to clarify what exactly the Duke wanted. Evan noticed the look on her face but didn't comment, and asked only to stroke his head some more. This came as a shock to the girl, as she had expected more, and here only a pat on the head came. She was insanely sorry, and the Duke couldn't contain his emotions, so he turned away and laughed. With a laugh, he asked his bride-to-be and wife what she had hoped for at this delicate moment. And then he called her a lady pervert, which not that it offended, but it didn't please the girl. And then it dawned on her that the Duke probably remembered everything from the night he'd slept over at their house. Evan admitted that it had been hard for him to hold back, because the girl he liked had come into his room while he was asleep, and it could have had irreversible consequences if he hadn't been able to hold back. But he wanted to take his time and approach Viola at a leisurely pace, as he was now, embracing her. Viola had her own opinion on the matter. She didn't mind the rapid development of events and the relationship between them. At this point, Evan hugged the girl even tighter and told her that there were many interesting things he would like to try with her for the first time. He'd asked her to move forward together step by step, and now he wanted her to stroke his head some more. And a few days later, rumours spread throughout the city, so tensions were high in Viola's home. So Viola's mum called her daughter in for a conversation over a cup of tea in the living room. The woman decided to start from afar, as there were various rumours going around, and it was important for her to know whether her daughter knew about them or not. But Viola decided to pretend she didn't know what she was talking about. The mother said that these rumours are related to the Duke, and it is very difficult for her to voice them, as it may affect her daughter as well. And then the woman sharply asked Viola if she was okay. The girl said yes, but her mother was staring at her daughter, and Viola felt uncomfortable that she couldn't tell her the truth right now. And then the woman said that she had given her consent to develop a relationship with the Duke last time, and Viola had left his room too quickly. And the girl's mind didn't put the puzzle together as she didn't understand how her mother knew about it. And the mum started telling tales about how she wanted a glass of water. So she left the room and saw her daughter. But truth be told, it was obvious that the woman was following her daughter. At that moment, Jenna entered the drawing room and turned to Lady Viola. The maid held out to the girl a letter that had come to her from the royal residence. It was an invitation to a tea party at the Imperial Palace on the 14th of the 14th at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. As she read the letter, Viola became upset, as she didn't think that she might have done something wrong lately and would be provoked in front of the imperial family. The girl realised that the required date was tomorrow, so she thought hard about what was happening. So she needed to gather more information, and for that purpose, she came to the tea party at Robina's house. The girls at the table immediately paid attention to her and started talking about the rumours. At this point, Viola admitted that she had indeed been copying Robina's paintings, but now she apologised to her friend once again. The girls apologised to each other, holding hands, pretending to be good friends, and the girls at the table announced that Robina had received an invitation to a tea party at the Imperial Palace. Viola let everyone know that this had come to her as well. One of the girls said she was jealous of her friends. It turns out that there were rumours that the prince wanted to give his wife a painting for her birthday, so Viola and Robina were most likely invited to a tea party. Viola was shocked. She had never expected that the prince himself would pay attention to her paintings and want to give one of them to his wife. But at that moment, Viola's mood deteriorated sharply. Everyone at the table noticed it and asked if she was all right. The girl was worried because she was afraid that she would be forced to draw a portrait of the prince's consort, and to do so with her abilities would be suicide. Her imagination painted a picture of the process and the result of her work on the portrait. Even there, the woman in the picture looked like a monster, not the beautiful wife of a prince. She supposed that for such an insult to the royal family, she might even be executed, which she would very much not want. But this development couldn't be allowed to happen, as she hadn't managed to do anything with the Duke yet, so she strongly regretted not pouncing on him when she had the chance. The girl imagined seducing Evan, but then ordered herself to stop reflexing and pull herself together. She was also tormented by the fact that it was her fault that everyone around her thought the Duke was a castrato, and she hadn't even gotten around to taking responsibility for it yet. Meanwhile, the tea party at Robina's house had come to an end, and the girls were going home. And then Viola was brought out of her thoughts by Evan's voice, who came to pick her up and take her home. He came to the girl and gently put his arm around her waist. The girl was surprised by his act, though at the same time he was bribing her a lot. The other girls watched the development of events with admiration. On the one hand, they felt sorry for Lady Viola, and on the other hand, what difference did it make whether he was castrated or not, when he was so reverent to the girl? And Viola only smiled and said she had to go and promised Robina to see her the next day at the prince's reception. And already the man and the girl got into the carriage, and the horses trotted off, carrying them away from all rumours and gazes. They rode in silence. Viola was jubilant, for Robina looked annoyed, for she could not even touch the Duke lightly, and she hugged him calmly. Evan noticed that his companion looked very pleased and reached out to touch her face. And that was until Viola remembered reality and the visit to the palace. It seemed to the man that he was the reason for the sudden deterioration of her mood, as the girl changed in her face and became sad. But it wasn't. But the girl couldn't clearly articulate what was bothering her. She looked at him seriously and asked him what would happen if she suddenly disappeared. The Duke didn't understand the question, so he asked her again. The man didn't even consider the possibility of her disappearance, hugged her, and said she couldn't disappear / And then he kissed her hand gently, telling her that he would always be by her side, and even if she tried to disappear, he would always know where she was. Viola was impressed, as the man's eloquence was getting better by the day. After that, she became embarrassed and tried to deal with the feelings she had in her heart. The girl realized that she was highly agitated, so she needed to pull herself together and take a sedative at home. Viola slapped her cheeks to regain her composure and realized she'd overdone it. The Duke watched her carefully. He thought she liked that sort of thing. The girl didn't understand what he meant. Then Evan added that if she didn't like that sort of thing, she shouldn't slap herself. After all, Viola belongs to him as of late. It seemed to the girl that at this moment, the man was unusually cute, so she was willing for him to take her right now, and without abandon. She had it written all over her face, namely that she wanted to go to his house. So he called her a pervert without hesitation. The girl didn't understand why he kept repeating it, even when she wasn't doing anything. The man noticed that she was breathing heavily and assumed she was thinking about something oddly obscene as usual. A new day came, and at the appointed time, Viola arrived at the Imperial Palace for tea with the prince. Rubina also arrived at the palace. The girls were escorted into the drawing room by the prince's servant. Viola couldn't remember what she was thinking all the way to the castle. While she didn't look her best because of her excitement, Rubina was calm and beautiful. And so they came, and a servant opened before them the doors to a splendid hall, where the prince was already waiting for them. Viola was amazed, as all the gatherings and tea parties she had attended before did not compare to this one. Everything was very beautifully decorated, and at the head of the long one sat the crown prince and waited for the artists. As soon as the girls saw him, they bowed in curtsy and politely introduced themselves, greeting the prince. The man was polite too, and said he too was happy to welcome them into his home. He then asked his guests to sit down at the table as there was no truth in his feet. But then, Viola noticed that there were 3 chairs at the table, not 2, so she politely asked the crown prince about it. The man replied that he had already heard about their talents, but it wasn't enough to invite them to the palace. The prince had invited them for a cup of tea this afternoon, and his brother had been very complimentary of the girls' talents. Meanwhile, Sir Kyle came into the drawing room, so Sir Kyle turned out to be the crown prince's brother. Viola had noticed his unusual appearance, but she hadn't expected it to turn out like this. Now she realized what advantage he'd been talking about last time. Turns out it was ancestry. This was a surprise not only to Viola, but also to Rubina, who couldn't control the expression on her face. Now everyone was assembled and took their seats at the table and could talk business. The reason for the invitation was about to be voiced by the heir to the throne. The reason was simple. The prince wished to give a birthday present to his wife. He did not deny that his younger brother was not lacking in artistic talent, but this time he wanted to give the woman he loved a painting by a different author. Viola considered such requests exploitation of labour, but she prayed now that the prince would ask them to paint anything but a portrait of his wife. The girl repeated like a mantra the words that it was not a portrait and a miracle happened. They needed to draw any picture that would be perfect for his spouse. It was a small victory for Viola, plus the deadline to get the job done was a month. The prince thought that on the one hand, the time limit might be short, but on the other hand, he believed that the girls would be able to create real masterpieces. Viola realized that 1 month was more than enough. It would be important to identify a theme that would appeal to the future queen, as her work was not a dream on a summer night, but a nightmare of a winter period. But then Rubina spoke up. She asked the pint-sized woman what would happen if someone dared to steal that painting. He didn't understand the question, but replied that it simply couldn't happen. But if such a thing does happen, that person will most likely die by his hand. After these words, the prince left, leaving the guests in the room. Viola breathed a sigh of relief. At that moment, Kyle approached her and politely inquired if she was surprised that he was so blue-blooded. The girl did not deny that this fact surprised her a little, while the man was interested to know if there was room in her heart for him. The prince spoke very softly, while blushing sweetly. It was obvious that in this way he was trying to seduce Viola, but he was too late, as she already had her own big sweet puppy she was responsible for. Plus, she decided to remind the young man of what she had said earlier, which was that to her, conditions didn't matter much. So she honestly admitted to Kyle that her choice wouldn't have changed, even if she had known he was a prince from the beginning. But Kyle mumbled that he'd heard that she and the Duke hadn't had an engagement yet, but the girl was sure it would happen when she finished the painting. After a bit of thought, Viola suggested to Sir Kyle that they be good friends. The man had no choice but to accept this offer of friendship with a woman he liked. And now the girls were on their way home from the palace, and Rubina told Viola in all seriousness that she did not want her to announce her engagement to the Duke. Viola realized that the situation was happening again and didn't understand why her friend wasn't getting bored with it all. So she said she had noticed her friend's unhealthy interest in her and the Duke's affairs, which they would deal with on their own. But Robina was the one who bothered her. Viola understood that men who were of the same social level as Robina scattered, as there were unpleasant rumours about the girl. Of all the options left, only Prince Kyle was left, but someone like Robina didn't belong next to someone like him. So Viola asked her friend if she had found a man who would truly love her. Robina smiled enchantingly and said she had someone who would always be at her side. That smile was too warm, so it was obvious that Robina was thinking of someone special, so she needed to figure out who exactly. So Jenna had found the information Viola had asked for, and now she was looking at the drawing, realizing that what she had drawn looked divine. In addition, it said that the person in question can eat absolutely everything, in character is calm and determined. But what's most interesting are the human interests, the nude drawings. So Viola went to the city on business and met a duke she never expected to meet. The man did not leave her a step away from her, as he had missed her very much during these days that they had not seen each other. The girl admitted that she missed her too, but she had to get to one place today, and it was important. But the Duke decided that since this was the case, he would go with her to that special place to spend time with her. The girl tried to dissuade him, because she realized that Evan would regret the decision, but the Duke insisted. He was curious where they were going, and Viola said it was to broaden their horizons. This was partly due to a painting for the prince's wife, so the occasion for visiting an exhibition of nude paintings was legalized, although it did not excite the Duke. The Duke expressed almost no emotion, which alarmed the girl, and she began to argue that she had no ulterior motives and that she needed to go to this exhibition for research. Evan realized that she wanted him as a model for such paintings. The girl was a little embarrassed, but admitted that yes, she had had that thought. Duke realized that he had begun to be sexually attracted to Viola from the beginning, but she tried to justify herself by saying that she was thinking about art. The man decided to cover himself with his hands, but Viola was already looking at the paintings and doing so with great pleasure. The paintings were skillfully done, and therefore delighted the visitors, at least those like Viola. At that moment, Evan reached out to her and mouthed that if she kept this up, to see, albeit in pictures, other men in negligee would be very unpleasant to him, so he gently covered her eyes with his palm. The gesture angered Viola, and she demanded that the Duke remove his hand, but he was adamant about it too, and was not going to indulge her this time. The girl even got angry, as she claimed that she could and needed it, and in general, if he was jealous, let him be her nude model. She needed to examine these paintings in order to paint her own, for in all of Viola's works, the lower part of the sitters had never been finished, and it was rumoured that the prince's wife did not like the nude figures of men painted by foreign authors. So now Viola needed to figure out what kind of painting the woman wanted. Evan didn't understand his lover's desire, but if she wanted to see everything so badly... Viola interrupted him and said that she needed it all for business, not for nothing. So he gave in and said that if that's the way it is, he'd be willing to model for her just to get out of here. Viola accepted the Duke's offer, but in addition bargained herself 5 minutes to look at the paintings on display for completeness of research. She looked at all the paintings by foreign masters and understood a little of what the princess felt when she looked at them. The exposed charms of women's and men's bodies were undeniably beautiful, but they expressed more the beauty of the model's body itself, rather than the energy of the person on them. But the 5 minutes the Duke was giving the girl to look at the exhibit was over, and he began to lead her out of the building. But Viola didn't want to leave, and look at the paintings a little longer, but Evan didn't ask her. At this point, Viola threw the organiser of the exhibition a purse and asked him to send her these paintings home. So she asked the man for a favour, and he said she could count on him. In this way, Viola acquired several paintings of obscene content and was very happy about it. And then the girl noticed a man sitting on a chair near one of the canvases. She was afraid he wouldn't come, but he was here. Noticing that Viola was paying attention to the other man, the Duke covered her with himself and began to stare intently at his rival, which didn't please the girl from the word at all, but Evan wanted the girl to look only at him. The next day Viola came to the academy for a new lesson, and today they were supposed to be doing decals. She showed the students a picture of a flower that looked quite symmetrical, but she was going to add something else to it. She decided to put a leaf print on this symmetrical flower, and when she put some leaves on the flower, the symmetry was broken and it was uncomfortable to look at, as it was more beautiful with full symmetry. But Viola had her own opinion about it. She thought that even not perfect works are beautiful and attractive in their imperfection. It is the same in life when a person occupies himself with something he does not like. Very often people put aside their desires and aspirations in an attempt to please those they love. But the most important thing, according to Viola, was to pay attention to one's strengths, not one's weaknesses. Using the example of her drawing, she argued that naturalness makes both the work and the people themselves more colourful, and for this, it is not necessary to follow the standards invented by someone else. This speech of her favourite made the Duke smile. Kyle was also thoughtful, and the girl was already asking the students what figure they could draw without a template. After all, this way everyone can create a painting in their own style. Wouldn't they all be interested to see the result? She wondered. And at that moment, the Duke's hand raised and turned to Viola. She was startled, as she didn't expect him to fail at simply squeezing paint onto a piece of paper. She was afraid the man would still make terrible scribbles today, and he smiled gently and held out his work to her, asking her to look at it and appreciate it. Strangely enough, she was afraid to see what was drawn there, especially when the Duke was looking at her so intently. But when she opened it, she saw a big pink heart. Evan's efforts, the tenderness with which he drew the lines of that heart, touched Viola deeply. It was his declaration of love, so he hoped to get a positive response from her. But Viola wouldn't be Viola if she answered right away. So she decided to torture him and told him she'd think about it. The girl realised that the Duke's smile made her heart beat more often, and inside became very warm. She asked the Duke to wait a little longer, but he answered her that he understood, but he was not that patient a man. And then she leaned toward him and whispered in his ear that if he was patient, he would get a long kiss. Having said that, she left the Duke with her thoughts and went behind the pulpit, smiling slyly. But then her gaze fell on Prince Kyle, and she realised the man was sad and thinking about something. She noticed that his gaze had changed drastically. It was hard to describe, but she had a feeling of unpleasant déjà vu. At that moment, she caught a glimpse of his drawing and saw two girls standing holding hands. Yet they were different. But he quickly pulled himself together and asked how the preparations for painting the picture at his brother's request were progressing. Viola admitted that she was just contemplating a future painting. Kyle gave her a hint. The princess appreciates the meaning the author puts into her creation. It matters to her what the author wanted to hide and say with his painting. That is, the hidden message is also important. The man was sure she must like Viola's work. The girl thanked him for his valuable advice. But Viola was worried about another issue. What should she call him in the academy and in public? He asked to call him by his first name without titles or anything. So he decided to ask if he could just call her Viola, without the prefix lady, and smiled sweetly. And she was about to agree, but Evan hugged her and said in a jealous rage that he was the only one who had the right to call her that. At this point, the men were like two predators ready to go into battle for a female. Viola was angry because the Duke had chased away the man who could help her. But the man was sure he could help her too. But the girl asked for understanding that they might not see each other for a few days. But such a state of affairs was clearly not to the Duke's liking. Yet he looked very nice. Lest he take offence, Viola pecked him on the cheek and asked him to wait a little longer. The girl promised him that she would try to finish the job for the Crown Prince as soon as possible. Viola, on the other hand, continued her preparations for the painting. Everyone praised the princess and spoke of her in the best possible terms, some saying that she was always ready to help them, others saying that she was a person of conviction and had her own opinions. The more Viola learned about the princess, the more she wanted to meet her in person, as she thought she was an amazing person. And now, walking through the city, Viola realised that she seemed to have figured out what needed to be drawn and how. She walked around town for about 5 hours, so when she got home her shoulders were sore and she was generally very tired. She was met by her father. The man looked displeased because he thought it was the Duke who had worn her out so much. But it wasn't true, and the girl informed her father that she had been walking around town looking for inspiration for a painting for the prince. But the father still worried and taught his daughter to hit the Duke below the belt if he offended her in any way, word or deed. So it was time to get to work on the painting. For that she even sent Gina away and opened the door to the studio. And there, already waiting for her, were the paintings she had bought at the exhibition, 8 in number, depicting nudes. At that moment, the floor of the room became like a flesh-coloured feast. She was looking at figures that didn't have a millimetre of fabric on them. The girl realised that nothing could be more perfect than this. What she saw made the girl feel like she was going blind. But then she realised that she should pull herself together and get busy. Viola realised that the first thing she needed to do was to study these paintings in detail in order to create her own. That's when she realised that the world of paintings is very deep and multidimensional, so she was tired trying to create something. The girl realised that she was lacking materials, so she decided to go through the exhibitions of paintings with nude bodies again. So, she disguised herself and went to one of these galleries, but noticed that the visitors were too inexperienced to openly look at the paintings. And then, Viola saw one particular picture. The girl's eyes saw the silhouette of an artist who was in love with her and painted her as if he was kissing her with brushes and colours. It was an interesting idea, but nevertheless she didn't learn anything new to her until she took a closer look and recognised the woman in the painting. The artist noticed another girl, but if at first she was walking and admiring the paintings, now it went somewhere else. She walked past them with quick steps, as if she didn't like more than one, but in fact she was looking for something specific. Suddenly this woman noticed Viola and felt that they looked alike in some way, so she wanted to talk to her. So she approached Viola and asked if she liked paintings that depicted nudes. Viola admitted that yes, she liked such paintings, and her acquaintance confessed that when she first saw them, but was embarrassed. And then she wondered what artists who paint such paintings experience. But now she's noticed a tendency to overly frank pictures. Hearing that, Viola realised that the woman had probably stopped finding paintings in that style interesting. The stranger agreed with that. She understood that they were created by masters and everything was conveyed perfectly, both forms and emotions. And that was the end of it. After all, she was tired of such perfection. These two girls found each other because their thoughts on these paintings coincided, and one of them offered the other a cup of tea. They came to a cafe where both desserts and prices were reasonable. But Viola noticed that her new acquaintance was dressed rather strangely. Also, the protagonist noticed that this girl has an innate nobility. In addition, although the stranger's clothes were simple but in fact expensive, the same with her jewellery, Viola thought her acquaintance was also in disguise, but one should not forget propriety, so she told her name. The stranger also removed some of her disguise and gave her name. Her name was Salvat Herbert. So, the girls were sitting in a cafe, drinking tea and having a nice conversation. Viola was curious. She leaned toward her new acquaintance and asked her if she was married or not. Also in confidence and smiling sweetly, the new acquaintance admitted that yes, she was married. Salvat asked the girl if Viola was married. Viola answered that she was not married yet, but that she was going to do so as soon as she finished an important matter. But the red-haired girl was worried that if something went wrong, it wouldn't come to the wedding and she might be executed early. The new acquaintance was curious whether Viola's important business was connected with the exhibition, but the girl could not tell her the truth, for it was partly a secret. Salvat was very curious, but it was not right to torture her new friend somehow. But Viola promised her to tell her everything when she met her, and asked her if she would like to meet for a cup of tea sometimes. The new acquaintance agreed, for she had always wanted a friend, and she had a feeling that they could be friends. Viola also had a feeling that they were soulmates. But the tea party came up, and the girls said goodbye and went home, and both enjoyed their time together. But as they were saying goodbye, Salvat gave Viola a card with a gold monogram on it. The red-haired beauty also approached the carriage. The card wouldn't leave her head, as she had a feeling that she had seen this sign somewhere before. She couldn't remember where exactly she'd seen the sign, and in such musings she arrived home, where Jenna met her. The maid said there was trouble. Viola couldn't understand what had happened, so she asked the maid to calm down and explain clearly what had happened. Jenna explained that Lady Rubina had arrived and had entered Viola's room, despite the maid's protests, saying there was nothing wrong or strange about her action. While Rubina was in the room by herself, she found a book, or rather a novel, which described the details of this world and all the love lines. Now the lady understood what was going on and why Viola had changed so drastically. At that moment, Viola walked into her room and opened the door sharply, slamming it against the wall. Rubina pouted her lips and pretended to be very much startled by Viola. The red-haired beauty looked intently at her friend, and was angry since she was the one who should be acting like this. When Viola went into her room and sat down on the edge of her bed, and asked her friend about what she was going to draw. But Robina continued to play the role of good friend and said she wasn't interested in what Viola would draw. She just wanted to have a heart-to-heart talk, since they had been drifting apart lately. Viola, however, realized that it was a common pretense, so she told her friend that if she wanted to socialize, she should have warned her about the visit in advance. The blonde started apologizing and crying as usual. She noticed that it had become difficult for them to meet lately, and she had the impression that Viola was avoiding her. Viola glared at her friend and said that lately Robina was both thinking and doing whatever she could think of, but the girl tried to deny it. But this kind of behavior is unacceptable, especially when a girl goes into someone else's room without permission. It's unacceptable. Robina started apologizing as usual, and Viola has picked up on the fact that her friend of hers often says and does things without thinking through her words and actions. Viola then stood up, walked over to Robina, stood behind her and started talking. She told her friend that she really strongly disliked it when someone like her invaded her personal space. She was already tired of her friend and wanted to get rid of her. Afterward, Viola sat down in her seat and asked how Robina was progressing with the painting. The blonde smiled softly and said she was progressing well, but didn't leave, even though Viola already wished she had. The red-haired girl was sure that her friend would have a great picture, a masterpiece, but Robina said that she should still study and learn. After that, Robina finally stood up. Viola thought she was about to leave, much to her delight. But then the blonde stopped and turned her attention to the framed picture that stood in the most prominent place. It was the heart that the Duke had drawn for her. This display of love was priceless to Viola, for the man had put his whole soul into it. Viola recognized the fact that if it wasn't for Robin, she and the Duke would hardly be a couple, so she was eager to see her friend at their engagement party. Robina said she was coming, and Viola started asking when Robina was going home, since it was getting dark. When the girl was left alone in the room, she began to look around her room. Everything seemed to be in its place. Then Viola didn't understand why Robina had come to her and what she was looking for here. Viola had made up her mind that if Robina did something bad to her, she would pay her back 100-fold. At that moment, Viola got the idea of a perfect picture for the princess, and the girl started to actively realize her idea, and now she had finished it. So Viola got into the carriage and went about her business. At the same time, she warned her mother that she would not be coming home tonight to spend the night, as she was going to Evan's. The Duke was glowing with happiness, but he did not understand why the girl came to him so early. The girl did not hesitate long to throw herself into the Duke's arms, and joyfully announced that she had finished the painting for the princess. But Evan didn't understand what this had to do with him, or why she had come to him since morning. He was obviously a little slow, since he was still sleepy. But since that was the case, she suggested that the young man sleep first, for she too had been up all night, for she had been painting all night. But she wanted to see the Duke so badly, that was why she had come so early to see him. At this point, the Duke easily lifted her in his arms and carried her into the house, as he felt she needed to sleep as well. And Viola was glad she was not heavy. The girl was worried that it would be terrible if they actually fell asleep now and missed such a great opportunity. So, what the girl had feared had happened. They had fallen asleep, and now she slowly but surely opened her eyes. Evan had been guarding her sleep the whole time, and when she opened her eyes, he asked her how she had slept. The girl realized that she had fallen asleep in his bed and was now stretching sweetly. The man reported that Viola had fallen asleep in his arms, so he didn't bother to wake her up. And then he asked what the purpose of her coming so early to visit him was. She said that it was necessary to keep her promise. That is, the young man had promised that he would pose for her in the nude. He didn't expect the girl to remember that, but not only did she remember, but she brought another item she asked him to wear. The Duke was a little taken aback. He didn't think he'd have to wear some sort of loincloth as well, but she insisted on it, saying everyone did. It was the men who had come to her before that had given her this idea. It was more than a wonderful example, so she nudged him to get out and hurry up and change into that outfit. But the man stopped abruptly. Viola didn't understand what had happened this time or why he had stopped. At that moment, he turned around abruptly, took the girl's hand, and offered her another option, which was to change her outfit right there in the room in front of her. That was a great idea. Evan started with his shirt. Slowly, he undid all the buttons and began to take it off. The girl's pulse quickened. Viola felt like she was watching an erotic movie in a popcorn theatre. She noted that the Duke had a strong neck. But not only was the Duke's neck beautiful, The muscles on his chest were magnificent. He looked like an antique statue. Evan hung up his shirt and said that Viola was truly a lady perv, while gently putting his arm around her shoulders. He was too close, and the girl said he knew it from the beginning, so he made his choice with his eyes open to the truth. But the Duke was tired of talking, and he knew Viola was too, so he kissed the girl. Morning came. The girl sat and held the Duke's hand. She was content as she had gotten the picture and something more interesting yesterday. So she didn't understand who had the idea to call the Duke a castrato. It was time for her to leave, but then she suggested that Evan attend an artists' convention with her, as she wanted to show everyone that he belonged to her. The Duke didn't know whether he could go there or not, but Viola assured him that since they would be married soon, it was obligatory. At these words, the man from the wolf became like a cute puppy. They hugged and asked Viola to stand with him a little longer, but the girl was running very late, so it was time to call it a day. And so they went together dressed up to a gathering of artists and nobles to show everyone that they are a couple. And suddenly Viola noticed that in the centre of the hall, Kyle and Robina were talking about something, and Viola realised that she had to protect the prince from her friend. So he and Duke walked over to Robina and Kine and greeted each other. Robina gushed that her friend was late, but Viola muttered quite loudly that it was all the Duke's fault, as he had woken up late, so they had left his estate late. Robina, however, pretended not to understand her friend, assuming that she had stopped by the Duke's house first, and then they had come here together. At that moment, Viola grabbed the Duke's hand, pulled him toward her, and told him that they had spent the night together. And then the girl went on and said that yes, she and the Duke were a couple, and their engagement would be announced soon, so she wanted to introduce him to the public as her favourite man. Kyle looked glum, so he decided to excuse himself, citing important and urgent matters. Robina, on the other hand, pretended to be very happy for her friend, and then asked about her painting for the Crown Prince's wife. The girl said she had finished her work, then added that she and Evan needed to go say hello to the other guests at the meeting. At this point, Robina grabbed her friend's hand and asked her to come over to visit her tomorrow and look at her painting, because she had a problem and needed some outside advice. Viola agreed as she realised that the blonde had come to her recently for a reason, but so far she couldn't figure out what her intentions were. The meeting was over and the girl returned home. Her mother was waiting for her in the living room and looked at her expectantly. Viola gave a thumbs up and thought to herself that her future husband was far from castrating. At these words, the woman breathed a sigh of relief and said that she had always believed the best about the Duke. The next day, Viola went to visit Robina and was very late for the meeting. Robina, on the other hand, pretended that everything was fine, though in truth, it was obvious that she had been expecting her friend since the morning, and not now. But the blonde quickly pulled herself together and called her friend into her workshop. Viola wondered what Robin would show her, and it was a picture of a naked girl with no face. The red-haired beauty certainly didn't expect to see a masterpiece, but this picture, though well executed, was no different from 100 others in this style. Viola really hoped her friend wouldn't give it to the princess, but she asked about it just in case. But Robina didn't answer, and asked what Viola thought about the painting itself. The girl didn't know what to say to her friend, but then she clapped her hands and said that the drawing looks very realistic, so her friend is a great master of her craft. Viola, however, went on and said that her friend didn't need her advice, as the picture was very clear and well executed. But then, after a little thought, she added that it was not unlike many others in a similar style. This room seemed a little strange to Viola, as she had self-portraits of the blonde girl everywhere in here, but among all the paintings one stood out that was particularly good. It also had a floral background, though such a thing was rare for self-portraits. Viola thought that her friend liked her looks very much. But among all these paintings, the guest did not notice the one she gave to her friend for her birthday, so she assumed that the girl didn't like it. Viola said she was referring to the painting she had given her friend recently, but then suggested that the girl might have gotten rid of it in some way, like tearing it up or burning it or trampling it. Robina protested and said she'd taken her elsewhere since she liked her so much, but Viola was curious about where exactly she'd hung her. The blonde said that the maid had hung the painting in a special place on her orders. And so the girls were already in the living room and drinking tea. Robina, as if unknowingly, asked her friend if she draws nudes. Viola agreed that yes, she had painted pictures in that style, but it was her hobby, so she didn't think it was right or appropriate to present such work as a gift to the princess. And then she also called it an unfunny joke, and to smooth over the awkwardness, she said she had to go home because it was getting late. It was X Day. Viola and Robina came again to the imperial palace to show their paintings to the princess and her husband. But there was a strange atmosphere between the girls, as Robina openly ignored her friend without anyone seeing it. They entered the room where the crown prince and his wife were already waiting for them, and a woman who reminded Viola of someone. But there was a rather cold and strange atmosphere in the room. Nevertheless, the princess wanted to look at the girls' paintings first, and then give her opinion and ask questions. So the girls showed the prince and princess their work. Robina, as Viola had expected, replaced her painting with a family portrait. Robina began to tell what she had painted, but the princess would not listen to her and asked Lady Viola to begin the story of her painting. Viola began the story. She pictured the forest. But the most important thing is that the picture was not painted with a brush, but with the hands of other people, because every print they saw on the canvas was made by the fingers of people who wanted to wish the woman a happy birthday. After all, for the sake of this picture, the girl went to the centre of the capital, and every person who left their imprint praised the princess, and Viola herself rejoiced that she was soon to meet the future queen. Plus, the trees symbolize the citizens of the empire, and a woman will always look at every citizen with wisdom like these trees. This explanation, and the picture itself, did not leave the princess indifferent, and she praised the girl, calling her work magnificent. But the woman had a question as to why Viola had sent another canvas to the palace. The servants brought another painting into the room where the girls were showing their work, and when the black cloth was removed, Viola recognized it as Robina's recent nude painting. The princess was beyond angry, as she thought Viola had sent her this masterpiece, but it was not clear for what purpose. It even had her signature. Now Viola understood Robina's train of thought, though she pretended to be surprised. Viola now used all her trump cards. For starters, she said it was not her work, and she never signs her paintings. The second is that she hasn't worked in this style in a long time, and besides, because of the forest work, she wouldn't have had the energy physically left for such a painting. Third, Viola stated that she was not a fan of nudes, and she had recently met a lady at an exhibition who shared her opinion. Here the princess tensed a little. Then she pulled out the card the princess had given her then, and smiled sweetly. And lastly, she asked the princess to look at her puntism painting from afar. This angle she herself liked best. And lastly added that this painting is more reminiscent of Lady Viola's style of work. Robina smiled sweetly in front of everyone, but in her heart she was shaking with hatred for Viola. Viola added that both the masks and palette are all reminiscent of Lady Robina's signature style. Robina, as usual, decided to pretend that she knew nothing and assumed that someone was very jealous of Lady Viola, so in this way decided to play a joke on her. Viola, on the other hand, thought it sounded very absurd and quite dangerous. As the atmosphere in the room became even worse, the princess was not the kind of person who could tolerate such jokes on the imperial family, so she wanted to find and arrest the joker. Robina, however, began to make excuses, and the princess pressed on, trying to figure out what the artist meant then. The girl had no choice but to admit her mistake and apologize to the princess. The prince decided to end their meeting there, ordered the paintings to be taken away, and warned the girls that he would summon them to the palace again after inspecting their work. As the girls bowed in curtsy, Viola quietly told her friend that she shouldn't have crossed the line. Robin was annoyed by this, but Viola was eager for everyone around her to recognize and see her real face. A few days passed, and the princess sent Viola a letter asking to meet the girl. The red-haired beauty had already arrived at the appointed place. She was worried that the woman might not like her painting. It was another cafe where they could talk in peace. Salvet took off her dark glasses, sighed and apologized to the girl for getting it all wrong. But Viola thought that the woman shouldn't worry, as everyone would soon find out that she wasn't the one who painted that picture, so it was okay. That was the end of the formalities. The princess smiled slyly and asked her friend if she understood why they had met today. Viola assumed it was about her actual painting. The princess fell in love with this masterpiece because it was what she wanted, and in general they understood each other very well, half-heartedly. At first, the woman couldn't understand what the strange dots depicted there were, but when she looked more closely from afar, she could make out a male silhouette. That was the main message of this painting. Admire the beautiful male nude body, while others see the forest on the canvas. The princess recognized Viola's talent and worth, so she knew it would be a bad thing to lose someone like the artist as a friend. After all, until everything was cleared up, the woman wanted to execute Viola, as she was afraid that everyone had found out about her infatuation because of her. But Viola was beginning to worry about what would happen to Lady Rubina. The princess smiled, surprised that Viola cared about the blonde, even after she had slandered her. But the artist admitted that she doesn't really care about her friend, as she believes it's important to keep personal and work separate. And the lady let herself cross the line. Tea was steaming on the table, and the princess said that in this matter their thoughts were also in accord, for a true friend is one who can point out to another her mistakes. The princess reminded Viola that they used to say an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, so the same principle would apply to Rubina's punishment. Viola realized that her new friend was not as simple as she thought. The princess did come up with a punishment for Rubina. She made her draw the girl in the square, among the crowds of people, nude figures. The crowd commented on Rubina's every move. Luli didn't understand why she was painting only with flesh-coloured paint, or why this painting was so strange. They thought it was probably some kind of mistake, but there was no mistake. Viola and Evan also came to the square. Evan noticed that Rubina was looking at her friend differently than usual and asked what had happened between them. Viola realized that the blonde was holding up pretty well, and the culprit herself was almost crying with anger. She didn't want to do it. She considered what was happening a disgrace, and in order not to draw and to be pitied, she pretended to feel sick and faint. But this spectacle of hers had been detected by Viola, and she decided to arrange her own, not to let her friend escape so easily from punishment. So she was already running to her aid. She ran up to the girl, started to beg her to wake up, but Rubina only begged her to leave mentally. Viola decided to seize the moment, saying it was all for the good, as she needed the blonde to come to her senses, so she gave her the first slap. The girl kept hitting her friend on the cheeks to make her come to her senses, while begging for someone to come to their aid. She herself admired her friend's acting. Viola realized that Rubina was probably in pain. Her cheek even reddened from the slap, but she continued to pretend. But since that didn't work, Viola whispered to Rubina that she wasn't getting off that easy, as the princess wasn't the kind of person who would let the situation slide. The paramedics came, loaded Rubina on a stretcher and carried her away, while Viola worried that she had tried in vain to slap her, for she lay with her eyes closed until the end. Evan came over to her at that moment, and he said that it looked like she loved her friend very much, which was why she was putting so much effort into making her wake up. Some time passed, and the princess wrote a letter to Viola again. The letter stated that she had already heard that Lady Rubina was able to get away with it again. She didn't like it either, so for her part she tried to take action, but someone kept preventing her from doing so. So to boost her morale, she suggested Viola meet up, as she had also prepared a small gift for her. After reading the letter, Viola realized that Rubina had an ally who wasn't even afraid to put sticks in the princess's wheels. But the girl realized that he'd better stop before it was too late. And so the princess arrived to meet Viola. The girl was a little frightened by such a huge number of guards at the woman's side, but the woman was already waving to her. The princess was going to take her friend to a secret place that only a limited number of people know about, in gratitude for her birthday present. Viola felt that maybe she shouldn't go in there, but she went in and marvelled. It was a secret vault of nude paintings. If someone had told her that the princess was a fan of nude paintings, Viola would never have believed it. The further they went into the depths of the vault, the more Viola wanted to possess this magnificent collection of paintings. The princess, even at their first meeting, realized that the girl can appreciate and understand this direction of painting. So she decided to show her this magical place. The princess hung Viola's painting in the most prominent place in the gallery, as she was simply enchanted by it. And the artist rejoiced because she had no outstanding abilities, but she was recognized. Not only were there paintings in this place, but you could sit, drink wine, and talk. The princess confessed that she had wanted to do that for a long time, but there was no one to do it with. The woman admitted that her status obliged her to be reserved, aloof, well-mannered, but here she could be herself and act at ease. They sat side by side, wine glasses in front of them, but the princess admitted that she didn't particularly like the drink, but she liked that kind of atmosphere. After all, the problem was that when she drank alone, she had no girlfriends at all, the number of glasses got higher and higher. But since that's the way it is, and the princess trusts her, Viola mixed her a specialty cocktail that she used to make when she was doing various part-time jobs. The princess loved it. The girl said it was one of her secret powers, and the drink really did taste very nice. The girls had already gotten drunk at the princess's secret place. She promised Viola that she would find a way to get even with Robina for everything she had done, and for her personal insult as well. The girls continued to drink, but then one of the workers of the place came in and said that a man had come in, raging and demanding that the doors be opened immediately. The employee was almost crying as the man had scared him badly and was telling Viola to open the door because he knows she is inside. At that moment, Viola sobered up and remembered that she had sent a letter to the Duke before meeting the princess with the intention of teasing him. She'd written that she was going to go beyond the bounds of propriety and asked him to find her if he could. Now she didn't understand why she'd done it. And so I decided to tell the princess what I had done in a big secret. Evan was indeed standing near the entrance to the princess's secret place and radiating the full spectrum of angry emotions. Hearing this whole story, the princess took pity on the Duke and let him into her paradise, while saying a nice hello to him and saying that they had not seen each other for a long time. She said she didn't know he and her friend were a couple and engaged, but Evan bowed to her and said they would pay her an official visit next time. The Duke had been worried but was now beginning to calm down, looking very cute, and the embarrassment suited him well too. Viola hugged him to calm him down. So now he turned to the princess and asked her if he could take his bride home. The woman allowed it. They were already on their way in the carriage, but Viola was curious as to how Evan had found her. He said he had been told where to find her by the Crown Prince. Viola did not understand how this could happen, and the Duke said that the prince has long known about the secret place of his wife, but kept it secret so that she could freely do what she liked. And in general, it was a very long day for him, because since the morning he had been everywhere he could and could not find her anywhere, so he asked her not to do that anymore. And the girl realized that he was obsessed with her, and she liked it. What was a joke to Viola turned out to be a challenge for Evan. He was worried that he couldn't find her, and if he didn't have to go to the palace on business, he never would have found her. The Duke admitted that his anxiety level increases when he can't see her, so he asked the girl to always be in his sight. She had to drink wine with him too. She didn't understand why she had to do that. It was simple. He didn't want other men to see her like that. The Duke's answer interested Viola, and she asked what kind of shape she was in after drinking wine. Evan said she was too nice now. But Viola was a little drunk, so she reacted to all the statements of the man in an interesting way. Now she told him that if he continued to behave in this way, she would eat him like a juicy steak. And all Evan did was touch her nose and call her a bad wolf. At that moment, the Duke became serious and ordered the coachman to stop the carriage. Viola didn't understand what was happening because they were driving so well, and now they had to stop urgently. It suddenly began to dawn on Viola that the man was going to send her home rather than take her to his place. This was starting to make her angry as she was hyped up over the wine. But even so, she was going to leave the last word to herself and say goodbye the way she wanted to. So she didn't think long before she moved into her man's lap, sat on top of him, and was going to do AM in the carriage, as she had promised before, since he wasn't taking her to his house. The Duke wanted to maintain some decorum, so he said firmly that it should not be done. But no one listened to him, and the girl was already kissing him passionately, and this forbidden technique, which Viola used, worked more than well. Now the Duke was already on top, and asked his beloved not to blame him, because now he would not be able to hold back after her actions. In this way, Viola succeeded in getting Evan to take her to his estate. The next morning, the girl was like a pickle, because in this she was like her mother. Resistance to alcohol was inherited. After stretching, the girl got ready to go to her classroom as her class was about to start soon. Suddenly, right in front of her, she saw Prince Kyle, who was clearly waiting for someone standing there. The girl looked at him and didn't understand why the man had come to class so early, because there was plenty of time before they started. The man admitted that he stopped by for a few minutes to let her know in person that he could no longer come and listen to her lessons. This news dismayed Viola, as she didn't understand the reason. Of course, there was still the possibility that everything was happening because she had rejected him. But there was something else. But the man said he will be officially introduced to the public at the princess's birthday party. So if he continues to attend her classes in his status, it will surely hurt her. Viola was beginning to understand the situation, but she was curious as to why his identity was being revealed now. But he answered that the reason and the time were irrelevant. He then motioned for the girl to come into the auditorium, as this would be his last class. So, the lesson began. Viola showed the class a drawing. At the same time, she said that it was not drawn by her, but at the same time she made it. The students who were in the class didn't understand what she wanted to say, and the girl continued, in her opinion, in order to create a picture you don't have to use only paints and a piece of paper. Meanwhile, she picked up an ordinary leaf from some plant and said that if it were dipped in paint and printed on paper, it might make a similar interesting work. After all, you can apply this leaf the number of times you need it to the canvas, and then add a little more paint, drawing a sprig that will connect all the leaves into a sprig. The girl explained that even if all the students print the same leaf, they will end up with different branches. Since each student chooses a different way of expression, so their pictures will be different, Viola continued. She said that the same thing happens to humans. Kyle listened attentively and with a smile. She said that people choose how to be and what image to show to people around them. It depends only on how a particular person wants to be treated. But at the same time, people put themselves in a frame. In her opinion, there is nothing worse than a hasty and rash decision, especially if you only look at what is in front of the person. In the same way with paintings, you can't immediately understand how it's painted. She wished each of her students to take the time to look at themselves and their drawing from a different perspective. At this point, she was so moved that she almost cried. But then she pulled herself together and asked the students to try to create their own drawing in this way. Viola suddenly noticed that some students were imprinting their fingers, and it was also an interesting and not a bad way to create a painting. Just then, the girl approached Sir Kyle and noticed that the sheet of paper in front of him was blank. She asked him if he had a problem. The man sadly replied that everything was fine, but that what he would like to express, he would not be able to put on paper. Viola smiled at him. She said the painting didn't have to be necessarily a masterpiece. So she decided to express her gratitude to him. For this, she took different pieces of paper and put a smiley face on his blank piece of paper with them, saying that even if this was their last class together, he was grateful that he always listened attentively and tried his best. Kyle looked at it and thanked the girl as well. Now they could meet each other a little later in the imperial palace at a ball, in honor of the crown prince's consort. Meanwhile, Viola had arranged with the other ladies to go and visit Robina and check on her. But if you think about it, it's ridiculous to visit a man who fainted while painting nudes. Viola was running late. She realized that Robina would be glad if she didn't come. Since then, she wouldn't have to worry about anything. But Viola planned to make it in time to tell everyone why her friend was painting nudes in the square. So she tried to set herself on the right wavelength and portray the right emotion. And so she tearfully walked into Robina's room, where the other ladies were already gathered. At that, she apologized for being late. The girls paid attention to her. She explained that she had class, but as much as she was in a hurry, she was still late. Robina, on the other hand, didn't look happy after her appearance. But nevertheless, Robina forced a smile out of herself and said hello to her guest. Viola grabbed her friend by the shoulders and began to shake her, wailing about how thin she was. Viola looked around. She realized that the atmosphere in the room was just right for a one-actor performance. So she turned to her friend to ask about that nude painting of hers. The girl held out the painting to Robina and said that the Empress had given her a chance to paint from a nude, and she had taken it and forgotten it in the square. So she, as her friend, had taken care of the masterpiece and brought it here. The other ladies in the room didn't believe it at first, but then they looked at the painting closer, and their doubts were dispelled. In addition, Viola added that the colours, palette, direction and brush pressure are all characteristic of Robina's style, not someone else's. It got to Robina. She was getting openly angry and ready to be aggressive. But what was most incomprehensible to Viola was exactly why Robina would send this painting to the Empress on her behalf. The ladies who came to check on the girl asked her if it was true. The blonde, as always, tried to pretend that it was all a mistake and she had nothing to do with it. It was what was needed. Viola didn't back down and said that there were misunderstandings with Robina all the time. But what about when she'd shown this picture to her in person and asked her opinion on it? Vila didn't understand. If Robina was so eager to send the Empress this painting, she would have done it in her name. But no, she did the opposite and didn't even ask her permission to sign her name. Robina tried to justify herself. She said that she had learned that the Empress liked paintings in a similar style, so she decided to help Viola in this way. This offended Viola a bit, and she reminded her friend that she was the best at this style of drawing. She then turned to the other ladies and asked them if they agreed that she was the best at portraying nudes. Yeah, and that painting Robina was trying to help her with wasn't the best. There should have been more attention to composition and colours. In addition, the girl thought that Robina's problem was that she was unfamiliar with this style of painting, and more importantly, that when she named this painting after her, it hurt her as this work lacked charm. Here Viola faltered, realising she had been a bit harsh, but she was offended, and she advised her friend to continue painting miniatures. Robina, on the other hand, looked aloof. She recognised that she hadn't done particularly well. Viola agreed that it was technically good, but very boring. Robina put it down to the fact that it was her first time painting such a picture. And then Viola said that it was okay, they were even now, and would assume that Robina was imitating her style, as she had previously done towards Robina. After that, the girl began to console her friend, saying that it can be overcome. She is living proof of that, as she has found herself in a different style and is happy. When one actor's performance was over, Viola was escorted out and left her friend's room herself, as she needed a rest. And then Viola turned around and informed the blonde that she was soon to be engaged to the Duke, and they were inviting her to be the guest of honour. Robina was furious, and Viola added fuel to the fire by saying that the pictures looked like the people who painted them. After that came the time when the Duke was going to formally meet Viola's parents, and on this occasion she fancied herself. The girl was worried and waited for her lover, and here he came and he looked like God, saying that he was ready to meet his parents. When Viola led Evan into the living room, the man bowed politely to the girl's parents and said that he had come to pay them an official visit today. The girl's father and mother greeted him kindly, as they had been waiting for this event for a long time. Viola herself did not leave the Duke and hung on his arm as he looked very good today, and thought to herself that she would tell him later to wear a suit all the time, as he looked very sexy in it. And the man looked at the woman he loved and, making a serious expression on his face, asked her about whether she went anywhere looking like this. She didn't understand why such a question. After all, the girl thought that she had chosen her outfit and hairstyle well. She was wrong and looked very strange in that dress with ruffles. But it was not like that, and so that Viola's parents did not hear him, the Duke complimented the bride quietly in her ear. It made the girl blush. He looked amazing at that moment, but to avoid embarrassment, Viola turned away, as she was almost bleeding from overexcitement. The picture of the young ones amused and embarrassed Viola's parents a little, but her mum definitely liked the Duke and his attitude toward her daughter. The favours were over. Everyone took their seats and the Duke decided to go way back. He directly and without prelude, resolutely told the parents of his favourite girl that he wants to marry her as soon as possible. But such a statement surprised Viola herself, as she thought that events were developing too fast. Viola's mother was delighted with Evan's push and persistence, so she was not against their wedding soon. But her father clearly hadn't expected that, so he spit out the drink he'd tasted and was about to sip. Evan was almost on his knees asking her parents for permission to marry. But the girl was even a little bit offended, as no one asked her opinion. The girl's father wiped away the splashes of drink with a handkerchief and asked the young man if he had misheard about the wedding, and he heard that he hadn't misheard. Viola looked at her father, hoping that he would understand that she wanted to walk around a little more before she got married. But clearly they didn't understand each other this time. Since the father admitted that he had not originally planned to give his daughter in marriage so early, but since she wants it so much herself, he and her mum will hurry up with the event. And Viola did not stop looking at him, but her father apparently misinterpreted the look. She wanted to try to tell her father what she thought with words, but Evan was already there, and he put his arm around her waist. The man looked intently at his beloved, and mumbled that he wanted to be with her as soon as possible. Besides, he was sure that she also shared his feelings and wanted the same. Noticing Viola's doubts, Evan decided to get her consent at any cost, so now went secret persuasion, using her weaknesses. He offered the girl to build a secret hideout like the princess. That first weight on the scale was in his favour. He promised her a large building near his estate for that purpose, and then put his finger to his lips, thus saying that it was a secret between the two of them. And he also offered his services to the model to paint her special nude paintings. At these words, the girl's eyes glistened with anticipation. Now that was the power of words and motivation. Viola was ready to marry him right now, and Evan was offering her an art studio in his house. Viola was hit by the arrow of the Duke's promises and is ready to play the wedding right tomorrow. The girl was already ready for everything, and asked her mum and dad for permission to go to the Duke right now. The girl's father tensed up, but his wife put her hand on his shoulder and told the girl that the first thing to do was to pack her daughter's things and move them to the Duke's estate. Viola's dad wanted to stop his daughter's move, but he was stopped by Viola's mum and told her that she would have Gina pack all the things she needed so her daughter could take it easy. Viola noticed that her mother wanted to send her to the Duke. She suspected that she was not their own daughter, but when she looked at her father's behaviour, she realised she was mistaken. Then they quickly chose the time and date of the wedding and engagement. Viola and Evan decided to take a walk. The girl didn't understand why the man was in such a hurry to get married and engaged. The evening breeze played with his hair, while the man smiled softly and said it was simple, for he had learned something important. He picked the perfect spot, stopped, and looking directly into the girl's eyes said that he recognised her warmth and how much he missed having her around. It embarrassed the girl a little, and she thought that she must have been a heroine in her past life. After all, there was nothing in life more pleasant than to hear such words from such a handsome man. But she worried about what if his feelings for her cooled, though she was going to hold him like a wolf to its prey. At that moment, Evan hugged her and said that the girl would be his sky, and he would be the moon in that sky. And as we know, the moon without sky cannot exist. Viola realised that it sounded like a declaration of love and a marriage proposal, and Evan added that the sky might change, but the moon was constant, so he would be her moon. The girl felt her heart beat harder at the timbre and intonation of the man's voice, but her heartbeat, which she could feel in her back, was the same. But that was not all. Viola's eyes glistened in anticipation, waiting for the last cherished words that should end every marriage proposal. And Evan understood what she wanted him to say, so he personally asked her to marry him and live happily ever after. On behalf of the Duke, because of a curse that was passed down from generation to generation, he never loved or dated girls. And that was until he met Viola. That day he went to Robina's house for the first time in a long time, and he was extremely uncomfortable being there. He'd been watching Robina, and during his observations he noticed that she was very polite and nice to everyone, which meant that anyone could be her chosen one. He was tired of the bustle and noise of the banquet, so he decided to hide and take a break on the terrace, as there was definitely no one to go out there. But he was wrong. That's when Viola came up to him and asked for his opinion on his painting, and then somehow she found out his secret and offered to help him. Then he thought she was trying to draw him into her intrigues, as she was always full of various rumours of dubious content around her. Since that moment, a lot has changed in the Duke's life, but there was a period that he was going to deal with her quietly, because she knew about his family's secret. Then at the exhibition, he couldn't understand how people could praise her painting, because it was just awful. He knew the girl had been copying her friend's paintings lately, and here she was showing the public this horror. She did not retreat further, and he became more and more convinced that she was not a stupid girl, but she had a poor understanding of men and people in general. This was confirmed by the case with Theo. After he protected Viola from Theo, he realised he probably shouldn't have done it, because it would create a new wave of rumours. He'd already been called a castrato in public, and now this. She hadn't left his mind since that day. He worried that she had hurt herself because of him, and for many other reasons. He thought about Viola constantly, and at some point realised that she was different from what the various rumours painted her to be. The Duke also gathered information about her and her family and relatives, and found no overlap with his lineage, which made him curious. How on earth did she know his secret? At that moment he remembered the words of his mum, who had told him when he was little, that if someone found out his secret, he would have to hold on to that person, no matter who he was, because that person would be his destiny. The man thought about it, and after all, his mother had said it not once, but repeated it constantly so that he would remember her admonition well. So he set aside the investigation report, realising it wasn't enough, and decided to personally check things out himself. It was then that he brought Viola's painting to the director of the academy for evaluation, and the woman said that she had never seen such a drawing and technique before, and it was very interesting and unusual. And the principal had already summoned Viola to her and asked her to teach at the academy. Evan watched everything from the side and realised that the rumours were false, and that this girl was much funnier and more interesting than people said about her. And when they came to the square, and the girl asked him to help her, and embarrassed him in every way, though he began to help her. He knew that such outbursts in a single number he could withstand. In the process of working on the painting and watching the girl, the man had a feeling of being sucked in. But this abyss was not dangerous, rather even on the contrary. After that incident, he took her things, and under this pretext invited her to his house, saying many embarrassing things at home. But he realized to himself that if she was his destiny, he was too vulnerable to her now. He also started taking her classes and realized that they were very unusual and fascinating. He especially liked the one about secret messages. And then he saw a man come up to Viola and hand the girl his secret message. At that moment, the Duke was jealous. This was the first time Evan had ever felt this way. Yes, he knew he was acting like a child. But when he saw the man giving Viola his drawing, something inside him woke up. And yes, it was the most real burning jealousy. Unexpectedly, the Duke received an invitation to Lady Robina's birthday party. He didn't understand why she did it since they had broken off their engagement. He thought about it and assumed Lady Viola would be there, and this would be a good opportunity to be her partner for the evening. But in the end, he showed up, but he didn't get a single email from Viola asking him to escort her to the event. And it had to be said, that made him angry. And then she came, and Evan realized he thought she was beautiful in any outfit. But here's the trouble. She chose a very revealing dress and bare her shoulders. He realized that not only he but also other men appreciated her beauty, and he didn't like it. So he put his jacket on her. And yes, he realized that he was completely and utterly obsessed with this pervert lady who hadn't even made much of an effort to charm him. He also began to notice that this girl wasn't afraid to say what she thought and stand up for what she thought. He looked at her and realized how beautiful she was, both externally and internally. And then he had a plan, because he is always used to winning and getting what he wants. As he continued to attend Viola's classes at the academy, he noticed more and more often how Kyle was hitting on the girl. For some reason, he really didn't like the man. It wasn't just the fact that he was courting Viola, but there was something about him that made him suspicious. He had also counted on a different reaction from the girl when she handed out identical hearts to all the students. But he miscalculated slightly and saw Viola and Kyle in the academy's garden, where the two of them were walking together. Then he came out of his hiding place, and Viola was frightened and began to fall. But his body reacted much faster than his thoughts, and he eventually cushioned her fall with his body. This event was to his advantage, for in the process he learned of the girl's weak spot, for she was so anxious that he should not die because of her. So he hugged her tenderly after the inspection. At that moment, Robina came up to them and made a remark to Viola about her carelessness. But the Duke was alarmed at the wording and the girl's behaviour in general. The story continued in the infirmary. The man didn't like Robina's encroachments on his personal space, so he and Viola were going to go home, and he already realised that this girl was his destiny, and he had waited too long for her appearance, so they would have no time for drawings. That's what he thought. Lady Viola did her own thing and decided not to go with him because she thought he needed peace. This disappointed and upset him very much. It was a start. When he was first invited by Viola's parents to a meeting, after watching her mother opening a bottle of wine, he realised he was screwed and he was definitely not going to have it easy. They drank, and the Duke realised that there was no end to this drunkenness. It seemed to him that if he drank another glass, he would stay here forever. While he was lying on his face, then mother and daughter were discussing his person, he heard that the woman liked the fact that he had not been involved in any scandal with the opposite sex. Viola's mum gave him 100 points. He was, in her opinion, better than those strange men who chased Viola. The Duke was once again convinced that Viola was an unusual girl. And the girl's father helped him get to the bedroom where he was to spend the night. And the man thought about how to make their relationship so interesting. So he lay there and pretended stubbornly to be asleep. Still, he waited for Viola to come to him. He wasn't a dandelion boy either. Of course he was worth the plans. And then he thought at first that since she was so active, maybe they should get even closer to each other tonight. But then he decided it would be more interesting to torture her a little more. So he pretended to be asleep again, thus giving her a chance to escape. And when she left the room, he sat down on the bed. The man noticed that Viola was not ready for intimacy yet, so he decided to give her some more time. And then there was an incident at the academy. And then the Duke hired guards and ordered them to find the culprit at any cost, sparing no money, time, or effort. It was a great chance for the Duke to earn extra points in Viola's approval rating and admiration for his humble persona. She also made him a castrato for everyone, and she was so careless, especially when she came to him early in the morning and fell asleep in his bed. It wasn't like he could say exactly when he realized for sure that he would never be able to meet a girl like Viola again in his life these days. It had been a few days since the meeting with Viola's parents. Robina had been walking around town, meeting other ladies and trying to justify her actions, and the picture everyone was talking about. And X-Day came, the birthday of the Crown Prince's consort, where many nobles were invited. Jenna was helping Viola get ready. The maid could see that she was in a good mood as she smiled and hummed a song, Viola confirmed, as she was going to the ball tonight, and the maid had promised to style her hair beautifully. And so Viola and Evan arrived at the Imperial Palace. The girl asked him to behave naturally, as now she was next to him, and so he could calmly communicate with other girls. The Duke knew it well enough himself, but he only wanted to touch her, and afterward he kissed her hand. The ball had begun. There were several leading pairs of guests in the main hall, Viola and Evan, the prince and princess, and Kyle and Robina. The princess took the floor. She thanked everyone who had come to the palace today to share these moments of her birthday with her. Especially the woman thanked Lady Viola, who was the author of her gift painting, for her work is magnificent. The girl sat down in a curtsy. The princess continued. She walked slowly to another part of the hall, where there were 2 easels covered with cloth. She said that everyone had probably heard by now that the prince had asked the 2 ladies to paint pictures for her birthday, which they had done, and then suggested we look at them together, as it was a pity to admire such beauty alone. Viola was now beginning to realize what the princess was getting at. She realized that the blonde had missed her chance that the princess was giving her, and already she had removed the dark cloth in 2 crisp movements and presented the audience with 2 pictures, one of Viola's forest, the other of Robina's nude figure. Viola's mouth fell open as she realized that this painting of a naked female body was one of the ones that hung in the princess's secret hideout. The red-haired beauty knew that the princess would not leave the blonde's act without attention, as it offended her, so she also very much wanted to take part in this show. The birthday girl said that Lady Viola's painting could not leave her indifferent as it captures her sincerity. In addition, it is a work of art with a very deep meaning. The Crown Prince approached the author of the work and said that he would fulfill any request of hers as a thank you for such a magnificent gift to his wife. Since it was such a party, Viola was not going to miss such a great opportunity because she really needed something. The girl spelled out that she wanted to create an art academy that everyone could attend, regardless of their background or status. And she will also need a person to run the institution, as she is not good at management. The Crown Prince huffed as he thought the girl's request would be easier, so he would need to find out about the academy. Viola realized that her lessons would soon end at the academy where she worked now, so she needed to end them nicely. The girl realized that this way, with the Crown Prince's support, Jenna and others like her would have an opportunity for training, and they would be very happy, especially her maid. The Duke approached the girl and stroked her head. He now realized that perhaps the kindness of the girl and melted his cold heart. The Crown Prince and Princess, while watching the couple, Evan and Viola, thought that the 2 were very suitable for each other and very cute. But as pleasant and interesting as it was to watch the lovers, the princess decided to turn to Lady Robina. The atmosphere immediately changed, becoming dark and tense. The woman remarked that she had once before given her a chance to preserve her honor and dignity, but she had taken her words as a joke and had not listened. So she brought to her ball today to her house a finished painting of Lady Robina, a painting of a nude sitter. She asked one last time, or rather even mouthed in the affirmative, that she was the author of this work, and even thought to send it in Viola's name to the palace. The princess hoped to the last that it was just a rash act, and the girl would correct her mistake, since she had time to do so. But she never realized anything, nor drew it. The people around Robina began to whisper. They didn't understand how she could have created such a thing, that they had a better opinion of her, that this was a total disappointment. This approach to the matter somewhat surprised Viola, for she had not expected the princess to speak so openly of the girl's misconduct. In that moment she realized how cruel and scary the princess could be. The princess, however, stood her ground, and asked Rubina how confident she was in her integrity that she dared to deceive her and the entire imperial family in such a manner, and then looked at her in a way that gave her goosebumps and said that she was a generous person. So she told her about her mistake. Otherwise, she would not even be able to cross the threshold of the palace. It was obvious to Viola, however, that the princess was enjoying everything she had just done and was doing. And then the princess ordered this painting to be hung on the wall for all to see. The princess asked Rubina why she had done this to her friend, dishonouring her in front of them, sacrificing their warm and trusting relationship. She couldn't see what could have happened between the girls. But anyway, the picture was well drawn so everyone could look at it, and if someone liked it very much, the princess would give it to them. Rubina, on the other hand, as always, wanted to just run away and not be held responsible for her actions. But Viola didn't think it was worth letting her do that today either. But the Crown Prince decided that enough was enough, and since it was a ball, he should have fun. A servant gave him a message. Everything would have been fine, but Viola was concerned that Prince Kyle was nowhere to be seen. At that moment, the princess came up to her and said that she would try to find out about her request. And about Rubina. The princess felt great, and felt relieved for the blonde to have a hard time for a while, because the art world is very narrow. Since everything was fine with the princess, Viola was watching her fiancé and thought he was just shining. Then a man came up to her and asked where she was looking with such a lewd look. The girl realised she had been caught in the act, but she decided to pretend she didn't know what he was talking about. It was an unfamiliar man, but the longer she looked at him, his face reminded her strongly of someone. He looked very familiar, but she didn't understand why yet, and it was hard to deny that he was good-looking. Viola didn't understand the man's actions, and mistook him for one of the men Rubina had put up to her. But he was already regretting talking to her, and asking her to stop looking at him so strangely. Viola decided to take the initiative, and said it was none of his business who she looked at, or how she looked at him. But the man resented it, and pointed his finger at her, for he cared as much as anyone who she looked at, and how she looked. It was his business. Now the very unexpected happened. The man started threatening her, saying she would be very sorry. Evan called out to her at that moment, so she waved the man over, told him he was the one to regret it, not her, turned away, wished him a good evening, and went to the Duke. The girl ran up to the Duke and they started to hug. But then this strange man, who turned out to be Evan's brother, approached them. Viola didn't have a face on her, as she hadn't realised Evan had a brother. And the Duke suddenly realised that he hadn't said anything to the girl about his kin, including his little brother. The stately and handsome man's name was Haven Defaloa, and he was Evan's younger brother, though he was taller and broader in the shoulders. At that moment, the girl realised who she had insulted and that she was finished, but with all that she needed to pull herself together. So she gave a strained smile, introduced herself, and informed the youngest that she was Duke Evan's fiancée. The boy, though he wasn't happy about this acquaintance either, smiled and said he'd heard about her, but from what his brother had said, he'd imagined her very differently. They had no choice but to shake hands. Evan was glowing with happiness, looking at this cute picture, but here was a guy and a girl who disliked each other. He realised that Viola was a difficult girl, and Viola realised that Haven was a strong opponent. As soon as the Duke was distracted by some gentleman, the man and the woman jerked their hands away, as if they both had warts on their hands. Evan, on the other hand, noticed that Viola's fingers were reddened after shaking hands, so he admonished his brother, and Viola assumed that the man had overdone it, since he was very happy to see her. But then, looking at her poor pen, she asked the man why he disliked her so much. Evan said it couldn't be, turning to his brother. Viola gave the younger one a tongue-lashing. Haven said that if his brother was happy, he was happy and calm, and then asked about the fact that he had heard that Viola was taking lessons at the academy. Evan didn't let his fiancée answer and confirmed the information. The man believed that the situation in the modern art world is disastrous, as everyone can teach without having any talent or skills. He asked Viola not to take offence at him, as he has only encountered beautiful paintings in his life, and this is the first time he has ever seen something like this. It was hard not to understand the fact that Haven is practically saying in the open that she's terrible at drawing. But here's the thing, it didn't offend her, since she knew without his prompting that she had no talent and didn't draw particularly well. So she wondered what or whose paintings he thought were beautiful. The man considered good paintings, at the sight of which one bursts out an exclamation of admiration that cannot be stopped. Therefore, she confidently stated that Haven needed to attend her class, because his view of art was infinitely outdated. The man thought she was messing with Evan's mind, and she realized that Haven wouldn't do anything to her, and it was like lasers were shooting out of his eyes at her. There was no choice. The man had promised to come to one of her classes, as Evan expected him to respond positively as well. And then the man saw the picture of Rubina. He said he had heard that Viola and this lady were friends, but now a black cat had run between them. Viola thought Lady Rubina had good reasons for that behaviour, though she didn't understand them. But Haven objected, saying that sometimes there were no reasons. A person either loves or hates someone for no reason at all. It was in that statement that Viola heard something that made her angry. There really was no apparent reason for the Duke to like her. But Evan didn't want a fight between his fiancée and his brother, so he hugged the girl and said that what his little brother meant was that he loved her, and only her. And he didn't have enough time to list all the reasons for that. Viola was blown away and said she loved him because it was him and not anyone else. Haven, however, asked his brother if he would continue to live on the estate, but he didn't have time to answer, as Viola informed her relative that she was already packing her bags for the move. The young man asked her if she thought she would have fun there. After all, he lives in that house too. Evan hugged his brother and said that he hoped he and Viola could find common ground, since she was the first and last person he could love in his life. Havan did not yet realize what awaited him. Viola was already making plans to tame him, because life in Havan and his house should not be boring. After a while, Viola arrived at the Duke's estate to see him, but she met his younger brother in the hallway and suddenly saw that he had a sword, so she suggested that he pick a time and have a practice fight. She admitted to wielding the sword a bit, but she really wasn't. After all, in a previous life she had a 5th dan in Taekwondo. She also had a 4th dan in fencing and judo. But still, she did not reveal all the cards and said that she was no match for Havan. He was a knight. The man was embarrassed by her flattering words. After saying that, the man offered to put up a fight right now, so let her go change and come out. He would be waiting for her. Viola was frightened. She saw it as a good opportunity to teach the boy a lesson, although she realized that fencing was different, but she hoped her skills would be enough. And Haven promised he wouldn't hit hard, and thought to himself that he wouldn't fight at full strength. But here was the thing. She wasn't afraid as it was. So without fear she bared her blade, assumed a fighting stance, and prepared to begin her practice fight. Seeing the girl's determination, Haven too decided to accept her challenge and start the battle. So he was the first to take a fighting stance and rush to attack the girl. Viola wasn't scared and didn't rush to attack back. The first thing she did was to analyze her opponent. Now his speed was quite good, but it wasn't enough to defeat her with a single blow. So the girl easily blocked his first blow and asked if that was all, or if he could show her anything else. Havan didn't understand how she had done it. He wanted to know who she was, because she was acting strange by his standards. And Viola smiled and said that if he continued to be sarcastic, he would get it from her hard and hurt. While he stood there doing nothing, Viola decided to attack him. And then the guy realized that something had gone wrong, and he had to dodge instead of attacking, which he hadn't expected. And while he was counting crows, Fiona put the tip of her blade to his throat and told him to stay focused and be careful, as otherwise he would easily lose his head. The guy was silent and looked at her with chocolate eyes. This was the result she wanted to achieve. Now the knight realized what she was capable of. Havan tried to increase the distance between them to comprehend what had happened, and it was better to do so in relative safety. Viola had figured out his maneuver and was now going to chase him down and attack him, and so they crossed blades, while the best position was the girl's. She asked Havan to stop acting the way he was acting right now, so they should try to be friends so Evan wouldn't get upset. But then, Havan managed to knock the girl's sword away from her, which fell to the ground, and she herself also sat down and began to say that the young man was doing a great job and that she wasn't very good at swordsmanship. Evan had already come running over to them. He was very worried about his bride, gently examining her and hoping she was okay. Then he looked menacingly at his younger brother and said that this was no way to behave with a fragile girl, as he could cut her with his sharp blade. Viola, however, realized that if she had made more effort, it was unlikely that the young man would have been able to hurt her. And then something very unexpected happened. Havan held out his hand to Viola and said that they could get along and called her Duchess. Viola was now wary. She realized that she was going to be a duchess, but it was strange to hear it from a young man. Such a change in demeanor alarmed her. She thought it would be better if he behaved as before. On the contrary, after the fight, Huan looked at her with admiration. He had a sparkle in his eyes and blushed. At this moment, the girl had a bad feeling. A few days ago, Evan and Viola stood on the terrace during the ball at the Imperial Palace. The girl remembered something while looking at her dress and asked Duke if he remembered. Evan answered that he could never forget the day they met. The girl remarked that they would never have met or communicated if there hadn't been rumours going around about him being castrated. The man thought it was a joke, but no, it was the truth. So he said quite seriously that he was grateful to the people who were spreading all these rumours around him. The couple started laughing as this conversation looked quite absurd from the outside. But the truth was also that, contrary to the plot of the book, she fell head over heels in love with the main character, Evan. The girl had different thoughts in her head, so she decided to reread the novel when she was home. Perhaps the plot had changed. Although after the first reading the pages became blank, but since it was an unusual book, it was possible that what had changed would manifest itself. But when she got home, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't find the book. She went through everything in her room. She remembered that she had put it in the box, but it wasn't there now. Viola couldn't understand where the book had gone, because she couldn't have grown legs to run away. Right now, Viola was walking to the academy, and suddenly saw Rubina, who, though silent, gestured for her to follow her. It seemed rather strange. Rubina didn't say anything, and Viola said she was going to visit her anyway. Rubina led Viola around the corner and said that she had to thank Viola, as she had helped her quite a lot. The red-haired girl didn't understand what the blonde meant, and it was Rubina who was sure that Viola had ruined everything she had worked so long and hard for, and it had happened in an instant. Viola didn't understand the logic of Rubina's actions, since she shouldn't be thanked for something like that. But if you looked at it as the fact that she didn't have to pretend now, then yes, her words made sense. Rubina turned away from her friend and said that Viola already knew about everything. Viola didn't really understand what the blonde meant, because if she thought about it, there was so much she knew that a day wouldn't be enough time to list it all. But Viola wondered why Rubina was waiting for her here and had taken her to this secluded place. The girl admitted that she was very offended that she was the only one in such a deplorable condition. It sounded absurd to Viola. When you think about it, it was Rubina who had sicked one of her suitors on her and also encouraged her to copy her style for a long time, so there were a lot of terrible rumours about her, Viola. But with all that, she, Rubina, also takes offence. Then Viola walked over to Rubina, fixed her hair and gave her some advice. If she was offended by this situation, she needed to rethink her behaviour and start acting with dignity and honesty. But the girl pushed her ex-girlfriend's hand away and told her not to touch her. Then she gestured for someone to step out of the shadows. Two thugs came out of there and admitted that they had waited too long to be called out for fun. Viola felt like a gangster heroine, because she had seen such scenes in movies quite often. The girl had realised that if there were only two opponents, she would easily defeat them. But now she realised that there were four of them, and that made things much more complicated. And Rubina laughed. She felt victorious and said it was better not to mess with her. So the bandits started warming up. The girl understood that they practiced different sports here too. She realised that her situation was not a good one, as fighting four men at once is quite a task, especially when some are a mountain of muscle. It should be a tough but colourful fight. After all, if it were her, someone else he'd be scared, cry and tolerate. But she's definitely not going to tolerate. But the first thing she did was to laugh out loud as the situation was crazy. She even had tears coming out laughing. This unexpected reaction from her former friend puzzled and frightened Rubina. She even started to pull back and twitched. But what was more unexpected was that, in this situation, Viola threatened Rubina. She said that when she was done with the bandits, the blonde would be dead, and she would kill her. So, a scramble began. One of the bandits advised Viola to be quiet and obedient, but she countered that he was the one who should know his place, because otherwise she'd squash him like an annoying, useless bug. The girl decided to hit him once, but it was how she was going to do it that was most interesting, since she used to be called an egg breaker. So she decided to crush only one egg for each man to win the fight, and if they were lucky, they would have everything working, even if only once. At these thoughts, she began to resemble a demon rather than an aristocrat of blue bloods, and rushed into battle with the desire to win. She ran up to the first of the bandits and kicked him between the legs with all her might, so that sparks flew from his eyes. The girl herself was madly happy and joyful that she and this guy had succeeded in realizing the plan. Ida, it was a clear victory and the eggs were ready to be served. The bandit twisted in pain. Now she turned to the rest of the men, smiled enchantingly, and asked who was next in line for forced castration. She was so enthusiastic that she was ready to hit anyone and everyone and was waiting for the next one. At that moment, Havan was passing by and decided to see what was going on in the alley around the corner, as he heard an unexplainable noise of fiddling. He approached Viola and said that he heard a scream. That's why he came here. But he couldn't understand what was going on here. Viola had already asked him to help her a little, but the young man continued his shtick about who she was and how she was able to bring a grown, strong man to his knees without a weapon. He even drew his sword from its sheath. Huan gave up his sword and ran away, saying that she could handle it herself and that he should stay out of it. The girl was angry because she had expected him to help her. The young man decided to stand back and observe closely, as he was interested in her outstanding abilities. Robina thought it was a matter of the hat and stood quietly to the side. The men prepared to attack, and Viola didn't understand what was wrong with her fiancé's brother. But now she had a weapon and the skills to use it. So there was an aura of danger emanating from her that the bandits sensed. The girl herself was already making a plan to kill Huan. Robina realized there was no use for bandits, and then turned her attention to Duke's younger brother Evan. And then she decided to play another performance, as if it was not her who hired these bandits. Viola didn't realize for whom her friend was making a play, and the men were already yelling at Robina, for they hadn't agreed to such a thing and hadn't signed up for it. For Viola was good with a sword, and they didn't need it. They blamed the blonde for their mission to scare Viola, and now their friend lay unconscious. They demanded an explanation, and it was as if Robina was waiting for something, but not what happened next. First, Viola got angry, because she thought that if she was hit, she could hit back. 2, she threw, sword like a spear at the target. Third, it hit its target and flew within an inch of the man's privates, nailing him to the wall. And Viola herself smiled sweetly, saying that it was the man's fault, as he had forgotten about her, and was distracted by idle chatter with Robina. She gave the bandits a choice: run away from this alleyway so her eyes wouldn't see them, or she would personally castrate each of them. The men chose the first option, took the friend who never recovered, apologized to her and fled. Viola then walked over to Robina, who looked up at her with her big eyes. Robina didn't understand why Viola had helped her when the bandit wanted to attack her, and Viola had asked her to stop pretending like that. Besides, this case was about the two of them and no one else. Viola was fed up with it all, and very much so, and she thought it was time for her friend to slow down and stop doing what she did all the time. After that, she silently walked away. Havan walked ahead. Robina looked after them. But then the young man turned around, waved his hand at Viola, and asked if she was done so quickly. The girl was angry, but the guy bowed and said he had one request that only she could fulfill. She was afraid to hear his request, but Havan voiced it nonetheless. He asked Viola to take him on as an apprentice and called him master, but Viola decided to pretend she didn't know what he was talking about, and reminded him that she taught painting at the academy. And the guy continued. He couldn't understand why a man who is so good at so many things, but they teach painting, and yet he's so bad at painting. That was a sickening blow and right on target. But since the guy came to the academy, she called him into her class to show him a new world of art. At this moment, the Duke came up to them and asked what his younger brother was doing here. He even said that he had come here to study, and the Duke was pleased, as he thought it was a great idea that his brother would also study with his fiancée. But then Evan noticed that Viola was sweating a lot, to which the girl replied that she had decided to exercise before class. This answer puzzled the man, and then Havan decided to join the conversation and tell him what had really happened. But Viola managed to shut him up and told him that true knights should be able to keep their mouths shut. The boy rejoiced, for he considered it his master's first lesson. Evan misunderstood everything and told his brother that Viola was his girlfriend, and that although Havan was his younger brother, he would not give him his beloved. At this point, after a brief pause, both Viola and Heaven shouted at the same time that this wasn't what he thought it was.